I want to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the city's annual goal setting process. We have 4 hours scheduled today to identify projects and initiatives that are important to the community and to city council members, and also to allow all of us the opportunity to actively participate in the discussion. I have asked Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center to facilitate today's process. I envision this as our first step in goal setting, and I hope that as we leave today, we have a firm understanding of everyone's interest and how we will prioritize requests collaboratively. Based on today's outcome, I intend to call a second goal setting meeting in the next several weeks. First, I'd like to do some introductions to my Peninsula Conflict Resolution, the two ladies that are sitting to the far right. I'm used to using the far right. Forgive me. If you could introduce yourselves, that would help me, especially with the pronunciation of names.
Thank you. Aida Negron is my name. I'll be one of the facilitators for today. We are from PCRC, or Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center. Our organization has been around for more than 30 years, and we help people communicate better and resolve any disputes that they might have.
Good afternoon. My name is Saini Matealona, and I'm the Manager of Mediation Programs and Services with PCRC, and so we're delighted to be here and to help facilitate the process.
Thank you. And from our dais that has been brought closer to the community, we have our Deputy City Manager, Justin Murphy. We have our Public Engagement Manager, Clay Curtin. We have Councilmember Ray Mueller, Councilmember Betsy Nash, Vice Mayor Drew Combs, Councilmember Kat Carlton, our Assistant City Attorney Cara Silver, our City Manager Starla Jerome Robertson, and our Assistant City Manager Nick Pigueros. Also in the audience, we have our Administrative Services Director, Ms. Linka Diaz. We have our Interim Community Development Director, Ms. Deanna Chow, our Community Service Director, Mr. Derek Swaggart, our Library Director, this is incorrect because it says our Library Director is Deanna Chow. That's not true. Our Library Director is Sean Reinhardt. Our Police Chief, Dave Pertini. Actually, we see our Commander. Version 2.0. Yes. Version 2.0. Okay. Our Interim Public Works Director, Nikki Nagaya. And did I miss anyone? There are other city staff here as well. So thank you to the public for attending. Okay. All right. So, excuse me. We were just trying to make sure we remembered everyone. All right, so the next is our public comment period. And before we do that, I believe that it would be a good idea to go through the ground rules of the meeting, and PCRC will present that.
Thank you, Mayor. As facilitators, we always have our ground rules for every single meeting. And here are the ones that we have for this afternoon. First of all, we ask you to be conscious and always on time and conscious of the time that we have, to listen attentively and actively when someone else is talking. Try to understand and be present. Also, to communicate only using polite speech and body language, very important. Participate fully in the discussion and in the activities. Respect other people's talk time, space, and property, and be cooperative. Always be at your best and do your best in the session. Number 7, disagree or comment openly and respectfully with any member of the team. and speak from your personal experience and stories. And finally, something that is not here in this visual that I have to my left, be aware of your technology. And if you need to call someone or take an emergency call, you can do it outside. And here, please be aware of the ringers and sounds from your phone. Thank you. Anything that people want to add to these group agreements? Do we all agree to these rules?
Yes.
Can I see the thumbs up? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will have public comment. And at this time, since we do not have our screens in front of us, Ms. Judy Herron will be reading in the public comment speakers. Thank you. One piece of housekeeping rule that was not listed is that we have limited public comment to 1 minute. And the reason we did that is to make sure we prioritize the City Council's discussion with the staff. We also will be recognizing the people who have submitted comments on CCIN. And this is just the first part of goal setting, so do not feel that your public comment is being limited. However, we do have 4 hours here, and we'd like to use it at best. And also, we will have another public comment period later in the meeting. So it's not the only opportunity for you to speak. Thank you.
Our first public speaker is Greg Ferris.
Hello. Hello. Thank you all for your attention and for your service. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Triangle annexation, which you've heard about before. I just wanted to point out that the state wants us to clean up the unincorporated areas. San Mateo County is very clear that they want to have annexation proceed. The neighbors are strongly for it. I've told you about 80% support for this. It's ironic we're speaking first because we've been talking to the city for 5.5 years, submitted formally for 4.5 years. I wanted to point out with the new minimum wage that's gone into place, it's more difficult if you've got other business sections within Menlo Park that have different wages. The triangle is surrounded on all 3 sides by the city. We want to have uniform tree protection, development rules, uniform public safety. If you want to put in sidewalks to get kids on safe routes to schools, you have to go through the county. The county is not doing sidewalks. So I'd like to urge you to move ahead. I know the county has expressed support for this. And currently, the West Menlo Park is attached by a little strip that runs through the Stanford Golf Course. We need to clean this up and make one Menlo Park. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Williams. This will be followed by Leah Elkins.
Yes, I'm here to speak about the gas-powered garden tools. And in Menlo Park, we seem to have mastered the art of living with the unacceptable, but staring us in the face is a climate change. Over the past year, my associate and I have spoken with various Menlo Park representatives, and these are the reasons we've been given. It will be a long process, the reasons in terms of putting a ban in place. It'll be a long process. The optics are extremely challenging given the history. The city had a ban 20 years ago that was overturned by referendum, so why don't you both, as citizens, put it on the ballot? It will take the city resources away from higher priorities, unenforceable once a ban is put in place. We have spoken to the Menlo Park Police Department, and they have confirmed that per the current ordinance, they have successfully responded to all calls that are considered enforceable at this point. Gas leaf blowers do not have sufficient carbon impact to warrant the inclusion in the Menlo Park Climate Action Plan. Some of the above may be true, but in my opinion, there are insufficient reasons to do nothing and hope the state will take action. The bottom line is, the longer this is not addressed, the quality of life in Menlo Park will be diminished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Hi. I had actually prepared 3 minutes exactly, so I'm going to just wing it in 1 minute. I want to also talk about banning gasoline-powered leaf blowers in the city, basically, I just want to suggest that this, despite what Lisa mentioned, that this there are many arguments against it. It's an argument in opposition to all of those arguments, and I think one of the big ones that has come up is that it just simply they don't emit enough emissions to be worth banning. But the fact is that this would be an extremely easy thing to do. Once banned, the emissions would be gone. It's basically low-hanging fruit, and all the other things that we've tried to do and are doing, frankly, are going to be much farther in the future, and this is something that just could be done right away. And there is a lot of support for it, despite the fact that there was an overturn of the ban 22 years ago. We're in a totally different world now. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question.
Right.
Would you like to submit your full public comment?
I would love that, yes.
Okay.
Thank
So-
you. Should I just give that to the clerk?
Yes, please.
Our next speaker is Mitch Slomiak, followed by Pamela Jones.
Good afternoon, Mayor Taylor, council members. I was an 8-year member of the EQC, and I'm co-founder of Menlo Spark. Right now, you're faced with a critical decision because after 2020, Menlo Park, a national climate action leader, has no greenhouse gas reduction targets. If this remains the case, then we are signaling to ourselves and the world that this is a problem that we exclusively leave to the federal government and global bodies to address without our help. What are the chances that will succeed? But I will say if we maintain leadership by adopting the only greenhouse gas reduction target that gives us a chance at restoring a healthy climate, will reinvigorate our leadership. Please prioritize the EQC recommendations for a lean climate action plan aimed at climate neutrality by 2030, as well as the types of actions they're recommending for this year. 2030 will be upon us quickly, and we need aggressive, sustained action. You have a lot of duties to fulfill, but this is really, right to me, rises to the top. And I'll submit my full comments on the email log. Thanks.
Thank you.
Pamela Jones, resident of Menlo Park. 2 items. 1, independent redistricting commission. I'd like you to remember that a strong democratic process should not have a price tag. And I've submitted the information to CCIN, and there's hard copies. I specifically request increased police transparency and the establishment of an oversight committee. The data portal does not tell you things about why 3 cars are driving down streets in the Bellhaven neighborhood, or why it took 5 cars to do a stop at around 9 a.m. on the corner of Marsh Road in front of Bayfront Park. And we also need to be doing racial profiling that tells us exactly what is what's happening. And I will submit a document. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jen Willison, followed by Jennifer Bestor.
Good afternoon, Council. Menlo Together, a organization committed to a multi-generational, inclusive, and sustainable community, submitted a letter already. Just want to review really fast. Housing, transportation, climate action, and equity. Those were the 4 points in our letter. And I really want to challenge you today to lead with your values and think about the big picture and what you're trying to accomplish. I know that goal setting is always a exercise in resource constraints and trade-offs, but try to find out what it would take to do the things that need to be done, and then work from there, knowing all the information and what's possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Bester, and I'm from Menlo Park. I would love to make this the year that we are honest with Bellhaven about the Ravenswood School District. It would require only 200 words in the education code to add a supplemental regional cost, a regional cost supplement to Bellhaven's funding. That would be about $8 million a year. However, that money, while free to the state, none of it would come out of state funding, would reduce excess educational revenue augmentation funding, the ERAF rebate. That is, of course, the secret Santa for the city of Menlo Park, for the Menlo Park Fire District. It's what comes in at the last moment and allows you generally to prepay, not pay, but prepay your pension obligations. However, it comes at an extraordinary cost to the local control funding formula, low-cost districts in high regional cost counties like San Mateo, San Francisco, Marin, and Santa Clara. It would be 100% funded. A regional cost supplement would be 100% funded by property taxes that are already collected, already allocated to education, but again, are now distributed as a mushrooming amount of excess educational revenue augmentation funding. If any of you would ever like to talk to me about property tax, I've looked at it from the parcel level up in Menlo Park, and I would be delighted to discuss it with you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Hayward Robinson, followed by Karen Grove.
And is it 3 minutes or 1? I don't get it. Okay.
The last speaker was, it's my apologies, I forgot to change the time.
All right. Yeah, we did 3 when I was on the council. So this is your most important meeting of the year. This is critical that you really get a handle on goals, not projects. Last year's meeting, when you did this, was project priorities. That's important, that's critical, and that helps staff know what they're doing. But this is where you really get to say, this is what we want. This is where you talk about the things you ran on, things that your constituents want, the things you're going to talk about, the things you're going to look back on 4 years from now, 8 years from now, and say, we did. One of the things that we did on our council, which I suggest somehow got dropped, Starla knows it well, put a star on every staff report, every agenda item that relates to one of your goals that comes out of here. Really connect the dots so that staff, everybody knows, is on the same page. You should start doing that. Think about what you really ran on, what you want to do. Get that together.
Karen Grove. I'm also a member of Menlo Together, and I wanted to just echo Jen's comments and get into a little more detail on housing. We specifically want to urge you to prioritize housing downtown near the Caltrain station for reasons of intersectionality between, or overlap between transportation, traffic reduction, and climate, and equity, because it would increase affordability on our side of El Camino. We want to focus on safety and mobility in both parts of town, Bellhaven and El Camino, and to treat the climate action emergency with the priority of an emergency. And then we made a recommendation that we think that the city and community would benefit from some sort of support, which you can find at the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, to elevate the conversation on racial equity and improve outcomes for everyone. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Andrew Marcus, followed by Florence Thompson.
The City Council, thank you for hearing me out. I'm going to do a twofer here, if that's allowed. First, I'm a developer in the area working on projects in the M2 area. I think we need to create a stronger connection between the physical connection between the M2 area and Bellhaven. And with Dumbarton coming on board, that's even more important to create a safe passage from the M2 area to Bellhaven and other parts of Menlo Park. It's required for the integration of this new community into the existing community. My second point is to revisit the eligibility requirements for BMR units in Menlo Park. My understanding is that in addition to those who live and work in Menlo Park, only those people displaced in the year 2008 are allowed to apply for BMR units. I would suggest looking into that. People are displaced all the time from Menlo Park, and it's possible that you may decide that that designation should be expanded to other years as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Florence Thompson, and I live here, and I live in Menlo Park. My name is Florence Thompson, and I live in the Menlo Park area. I mean, Menlo Park in the Belhaven area. And, well, actually, my kids never went to school in the Belhaven area because I worked in San Mateo, so I took them with me. Anyway, but we really do need some more communication from the city and the Belhaven area. We seem to be getting left out many times. It's getting a little better, but we have been left out too many times. And also, I want to ask about the, let me find it because I forgot what the name of it was called. Oh, that's my time's up. Yeah, about joining the, let me see, what is it called? Well, the educational, the government alliance, yes, that's it. So I think that would be a good help, a good start for getting to be more involved with the Belhaven area of Menlo Park. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Julie Shanson, followed by Vicky Robledo.
Hello, council members. I'm here as myself. I also am part of Menlo Together, and I echo the comments that were sent in the letter. I sent my own letter. It's really important that we look at everything in the city through a lens that includes inclusion and equity. As you know, we went through the color of law exercise, and Menlo Park has been outright racist for years, decades. So it's time to start making steps to address those inequities. And a good step would be to join GARE and really hop on board with some reparations type of thinking and inclusionary thinking. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First, I support Julie, what she said with GAR. Also, as a Belhaven resident of Menlo Park, I just really want to make sure that we are not, again, pushing all the housing on Menlo Park, Belhaven side, because we are locked in. And I'm really concerned about the emissions and the pollution as we are boxed into that area. And I don't agree that people can say through EPA that it's not affecting us. We're the ones that are inhaling these emissions on a regular basis, and we are boxed in. With the 400 homes coming up, I'm totally against it. I wish we would have went on a moratorium. We are boxed in. How much more can you do to us in Belhaven? I love the positive things that have been taking place. Thank you for that, Facebook, everybody that's been a part of it. Also would like to get some rangers out there at the park. Keep the dogs on leashes. They're not being monitored. There's nobody out there on the range at the park, Bayfront Park. Again, please do some good studies that show that impact of the cars in Belhaven and the pollution that is affecting us. Thank you.
Our final two speakers for this public comment period are Tom Cabot, followed by Diane Bailey.
Hello, I'm Tom Cabot. I live in the Willows. I've been studying the climate problem a bit now, and frankly, it's gotten very frightening. I want to echo the theme of of looking at what it can do to our community and looking at the particularly vulnerable areas. Looking at sea level rise projected to be 3.5 feet within 40 or 50 years in some studies, and these studies only keep increasing. I think Menlo Park has a chance right now to get ahead of the problem by showing leadership, the same kind of leadership your staff showed and the council showed in adopting the REACH codes that have become a model for a dozen other cities already. I think we can do more, and that it takes a significant budget to do it, but that is the long-run, financially prudent thing to do. And I know it's tough to have to choose between today's priorities and the priorities of the long-run health of the community. But, I think together we have to make some tough choices. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Taylor and council members and staff. My name is Diane Bailey. I'm with Menlo Spark, and I'm also a part of Menlo Together. And so I just wanted to say everything that Tom Cabot just said and everything that Karen Grove said as well. I hope that you will prioritize climate action this year. One clear step is to adopt a lean climate action plan before Earth Day. And that's something that we had a very positive study session on last December, and I very much appreciate the city's support in declaring a climate emergency. I won't repeat all of Tom's comments, but I think that we are in a climate crisis. And so while we are focusing on very important projects, including the community center in Belhaven, it's also really important to designate some staff to make sure that climate action is still front and center. And I strongly support the recommendations that EQC put forward, as well as the recommendations in the Menlo Together letter for more housing downtown, especially affordable housing, to focus on resident safety and mobility on Willow, on El Camino, as well as everywhere in Belhaven, and racial equity. Thank you very much.
That was our last public speaker. We'll take the last public speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to keep it really short. I heard it's just a minute, so. You've received great inputs today, and I wish you much success in setting up the goals for the city. One of the inputs from Lynn Bramlett, I want to draw your attention to that, and I'm hoping that some of the needs on that, some of the issues identified by Lynn make it to the goals for the city. But I want to take this opportunity to focus on a broader topic, which is the culture and how we are as a city. And that is underpinning how we what we see in the city today, and that is the systemic and structural inequities in how we distribute and allocate resources, and in how we systematically ignore the needs and pain points of our residents. Kate Bradshaw's well-researched series in the Almanac about uneven ground clearly talks about some of the unequal land use, the food deserts, the skewed job housing imbalance, etc. But the issues in these series have been highlighted many, many times by residents to the city through public comment and emails, but to no avail. Those of us who experience these issues firsthand are called complainers. And so what I want to ask the city is to commit to equity and inclusion. And as a first step, I urge the city to join the Government Alliance for Race and Equity today, so that as a city we can get an unbiased view of how we are operating, and we tap into innovative approaches to build equitable outcomes for all. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was our last public speaker.
Thank you all for the input. It's certainly critical to this process. So in addition to hearing to your input from the community, this is an opportunity for the City Council to discuss their priorities for 2020. So now we will hear about staff recommended priorities for 2020 and a presentation on SB 330 impacts.
I think the expectation was.
So now we will ask the council members about your priorities. Thank you.
So are there any council members that want to start the discussion? Councilmember Ray Mueller, see your mic is pointed.
Yeah, so coming out of last year, we had, it seems to me, we had two longstanding issues to address, both within the general plan and then also within the specific plan, to look at ways that we could go ahead and address the jobs, housing imbalance in the city. I think that, and then also to address residents' concern. Within the specific plan, there's also an opportunity to try to figure out ways that we can reinvigorate the downtown and also, and frankly, provide much needed maintenance that's required there. So those two areas are, I think, still outstanding, going to require a lot of staff time. I prioritize to get them done. We have transportation challenges, obviously, with both, so that's those are cross department. The other issue laying over all of that is the climate action plan. We had a very good study session on that. I think I still would very much like to see that looked at from an assistant city manager level within their portfolio, because I think it takes a cross-department approach to support not only what the city's doing in the Department of Environmental Sustainability, but also to have that travel down within to the different departments. So those areas are incredibly important. I do want to hear what my colleagues think. I think those three things alone are going to take up, because they are cross-department and require quite a bit of work. What we still have other outstanding issues within the city, but those three touch on everything in the city. So, and I really think they're big enough. It'd be great to try to move those as far as possible this year, and be laser focused on those. And so I don't want to extend out. There are other things, obviously, to talk about. We've talked about ERAF before, and how we could use that, and the challenges around doing that without getting into the gift of public funds problem. So maybe doing, at that time we talked about looking at joint powers agency, but maybe it's time to go upstream even further. And so I thought that was interesting. That's an interesting approach. There have been plenty of wonderful comments that were shared, but I think those three topic areas touch on everything. And what I don't want to do this year is I want to stay laser focused in those areas and have staff have the room to operate with those areas with input from us.
Councilmember Nash.
So I actually have the exact same three priorities within for the city, and these are actually goals. And the first being housing action, the second being climate action, and the third being transportation action. And I also would like to put the GARE overarching over all of this, which I think the city should join the GARE network. So housing action, I think we should quickly take action that will lead to more housing in Menlo Park. Housing development, particularly affordable housing, is essential to maintaining the quality of life in Menlo Park and preventing state mandates replacing local control. We must examine all the tools in our toolbox, from administrative measures to updating zoning ordinances, that will have tangible benefits in promoting Menlo Park housing. For climate action, we should take action now that over time will make a real difference for reducing future impacts of climate change in Menlo Park. First, we should take urgent action in the next 3 months to address three key audiences. We should provide direction on electrification of city, municipal infrastructure, and reduction of energy consumption. Second, I believe we should adopt policies to accelerate electrification and energy saving for all commercial properties beyond our current reach codes. And third, I think we should support community education programs that promote community-wide electrification and energy-saving techniques. Second, we should adopt a climate action plan, a CAP 2.0, this quarter to adjust and improve our existing climate action plan in light of the current circumstances. And I want to recognize that the EQC and staff have done an outstanding job on this project, and basically we need to work with them to, as they've outlined these goals. And finally, on transportation action, we should take effective action to provide safe, comfortable transportation infrastructure throughout our city for people of all ages. We need to take action to promote walking, biking, scootering, shuttles, trains, and other alternatives to driving. And we need to take a special look at circulation in the Bayside community and how we can support the housing that's going in there or potentially is going in there. We have housing in Bellhaven, obviously. We have residents in Bellhaven. We now have residents on Haven Street. And we have some projects in the middle. There's a great need for better circulation there. Thank you.
Councilmember Councilmember Kat Carlton. I'm just sorry.
You know, it's funny. All the time I have people locally, internationally ask me, what are the big issues that you deal with? And I always say, the big issues that Menlo Park deals with are all regional issues. Because the way we're structured, we're a bunch of little places all lined up, and it's all systems. Cities need to not plan just for themselves. We have to understand that we're part of a system. We're part of an ecosystem. And I always say housing and traffic. And anybody who's looked into housing and traffic know that housing and traffic are like this. The reason we have a traffic problem is because people aren't living here and they're having to commute in and out. We'd have a little bit of traffic, but if we fix the housing, the traffic will follow. And fix, I say loosely, but they are related, and we have to understand that, and we have to plan for that accordingly. Now, anybody who's sat in a PCE board meeting knows I'm also hugely passionate about the environment. I think that's obvious. So they're the three that it's not just Menlo Park. They're the three for the whole region. They're the three for all of us. Arguably, they're the three for almost everyone on the planet that lives in a city and that sees things evolving the way they are. And the overarching thing in all this is quality of life. It's quality of life, it's safety, it's health. And so one of the things I'd like to see, everything goes in threes. In geometry, 3 is the strength. But it's how we paint that triangle. And I want us to always remember that we're doing this because of quality of life. We're elected, we represent people to make sure that they have that. They have that safety, they have the ability to be educated. Although I have to say, for the people that mention education, if we step over that line, we get our hands slapped pretty hard because we're the city council, not the school board. Although I know a lot of our hearts are passionately there, that's not the board we're on. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at things like that, like the triangle, for example. So I think the whole region, housing, traffic, climate, but let's look at it through the lens of increasing the quality of life for the people we represent.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Combs.
Yeah, thanks. In many ways, sort of following up on what sort of former Mayor Hayward Robinson was talking about, sort of going back to what you ran on and what was a priority for me as a candidate and asking my neighbors to put me on this body. And a lot of what I talked about was how the city interacts with residents at the individual resident level. And that it had been some concern to me that a lot of the focus for the city in recent years has been on larger projects and again trying to solve these larger issues through very large projects, and what seemed to be missed was how we were interacting like on the human level with individual residents. And so for me, that colors my goals, what I like the city to prioritize. And I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but it goes back to, and it is listed somewhere on our priorities, again, looking at residential zoning, which I do think goes to addressing to some degree the housing issue. We will get some liberalizing with regards to that regulation for secondary dwelling units from the state. But I do think that there are other things that the city could do, again, to make the process of people expanding their housing options and then better allowing them to stay in the city. The other thing is that and so again, that would be one of my priorities and goals for the city. The other goes back to, again, the idea that one of the things or functions that the city does is create sort of community for families, and a lot of that is done in relations to parks and recreation, and we do have now a parks and recreation master plan. But I'd really like to see us sort of, push the pedal to the ground on what we're trying to accomplish there. We recently opened a new play structure in Elon Park, and it was one of the few events I've been involved with at the city where everyone seemed to be happy. But it took way too long for a play structure and so again, I would like to see us, again, going back to how we're interacting with residents on an individual level, really look to some of those quality of life issues when it comes to improving the parks, when it comes to the use permit process, really looking to see like what we can do to make the residents going to that counter, right, are going to sign their kids up for a gymnastics class, like make that process easier for them.
Sorry, for those of you who see me sitting far away from Drew, it's not that we're good friends. I'm actually very sick today and trying not to infect him. When I talk about quality in life, I just wanted to clarify, I am also including economic development and community development, and that those quality things don't fall off the table.
Thank you. And I appreciate listening to my colleagues' input because a lot of what my priorities are reflective of it. For me, thinking about the health and wellness of our city is directly related to quality of life. And I would like to see the city invest in its infrastructure, water, transportation and safety, housing, emergency services, climate action, and also helping to support the Census 2020. We need an accurate count of our city so that we know how much services we need to provide, to find out what our community members need, and to make sure that we're investing adequate amount of resources and tools in those areas. The other that I want to see is the City Council actually adopt a 2-year work plan. One of the experiences that we had last year was the Housing Commission working on their 2-year work plan, and then when they brought it to us, it wasn't supported. And a part of that was because we weren't the council that actually passed their work plan. And so it made it difficult for the housing commissioners because they felt like they worked on something for so long and didn't get the support that it needed. And the actual ordinance that we ended up passing on the council hasn't even been utilized because it doesn't help anyone. And so to make sure that we're working in tandem with our commissioners so that they feel not just supported and heard, that it relates to our city council goals. And so if we have a 1-year plan, it doesn't really work with a 2-year plan. And especially in an election year, things change. So I would like to see us work more cohesively with our commissioners, whether that's the commissions do research and policy, or I'm not sure how it would work, but I know that we can be utilizing our commissioners a lot better than what we do, and especially along with the City Council's work plan. I think we just need to work smarter. The other piece that I wanted to bring up is that, well, one, I want to thank you for, I would like a copy of what you have. because it was phenomenal. Having an action, thinking about former Mayor Robinson that came and spoke candidly to us, which we need to hear. Setting goals and meeting them needs to be a priority, and also being able to measure them. And for me, I look at our guiding principles. How are we using that? Is it working? And if it isn't, how can we fix it? And so I look at what's the low-hanging fruit, what's the simple solution. If we're going to have a climate action, are we going to stop using gas leak blowers at the city level? Are we still going to continue using single vehicle occupancy? So we need to look at our own practices before we tell anybody else what to do. So I always look at, what do I do? I'm not going to ask the community, I'm not going to ask our council or staff to do anything that I'm not willing to do. So just taking a practical approach about how we solve our problems in the city. And the most important thing for me is health and wellness for everybody, the staff, the community, and the council. So we all are, just like you say, the three, we all are connected. So thank you. And now I will turn it back over to PCRC.
Thank you. So we will have, as we mentioned before, City Manager Jerome Robinson talking about staff recommended priorities for 2020.
Well, the staff has worked together to put together just a brief synopsis of what we think the 5 priorities should be. And these do tend to be project-oriented. You will not be surprised to learn that our number one priority is the Belhaven Library and Community Center. And I think the council included that in their action on Tuesday night. Thank you. The second priority is the completion of the Transportation Master Plan. We evaluate that we're 75 to 80% close, and we'd like to complete that work. The third priority is the Middle Avenue rail crossing. And I think you've all heard me say that I think that in 2 years, when the electrification of the Caltrain is completed, the only point of east-west connectivity in the community will be the undercrossing. Number 4 is further implementation of the Information Technology Master Plan. That's an overly large and complex project, but we have been making progress, and we are hopeful to continue to make progress. I think the new information systems that come on board provide us with greater detail and more transparency, which I think is incredibly valuable, but it's not always going to replace staff or create artificial efficiencies. It will produce more information and better information. And a better interface with the public, more towards the 24/7 availability. Lastly, our last goal would be to comply with the mandated planning and zoning updates and studies as required by the state. And I will now introduce Assistant City Attorney Cara Silver to fill you in on some of those.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Not be working. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So we do have a slideshow, and Deanna will be helping me with this item as well. There are a series of new housing bills, obviously, that have come online. There are also other state legislation that has been enacted since January 1st. One of those involves redistricting, which the council will be, of course, spending some time on in this fiscal year. Yes, thank you. There we go. Okay. So there we go. Okay, the slideshow is up. So SB 330, I don't want to overemphasize it, but it's just an example of a state law that has significant impact on staff resources and the city council's action plan in this upcoming year. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about, briefly explain the new requirements mandated by SB 330, talk about some of the timelines that have impact on both the council and city staff, and then talk about the impact on staff resources. So in terms of the requirements, we've talked about the substantive requirements of SB 330, and those are that the city council, or the city, since it is designated as an affected city, cannot downzone any areas in the city unless there is a corresponding upzoning in the area of unit count. Likewise, cities can't adopt moratorium unless there is a significant health and safety threat identified and HCD approves. This moratorium ban only relates to housing-related moratoriums, not commercial projects. The rules that apply to commercial projects have not been affected. Also, there is a tenant housing or preservation aspect of SB 330 that is also a substantive protection, and in that case, if a particularly described tenant or rental unit is demolished as a part of a housing development project, then that protected unit must be replaced one for one. And also the tenants in that unit must be provided rental relocation benefits, and they must be given the right of first refusal. This is a substantive area that we are still exploring at a staff level, and we think it may have some interesting consequences in terms of development of smaller parcels around town. And we think it will be something that could have a interesting impact on Menlo Park in particular. So we will be bringing some more analysis on that substantive provision to you at a later time. Today, we just wanted to focus on the procedural provisions of SB 330 because that's really what impacts the staff work. So in terms of the procedural provisions...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When, with the housing relocation benefits and provide the right of first refusal to displaced tenants, what rent is that at? Is that at a new rent or at the old rent or somewhere in between?
Right. So we are still sifting through those requirements. It's a pretty complicated statute. It hasn't yet been applied. It's interesting because if the units that's being replaced under state law is a condominium, a for sale unit, which most of these smaller ones are going to be, you're not required to offer that to the tenant at a rental rate, but offer it to them at a for sale rate. So, no, at an affordable level, yes. So it would be in accordance with the HUD has a regulation governing for sale rates. So, and these issues are very intriguing, and we do want to discuss them with you. So in terms of the procedural requirements, I think we mentioned earlier that there is this creation of a new application called a preliminary application. The purpose of that is to vest or freeze the development standards at the time that the application is filed. They're similar to a vesting tentative map, but now it applies to any type of housing project. Then the other procedural provision is this 5 hearing limit that is going to have some impact on the processing of applications here in Menlo Park, where we have several advisory committees who typically weigh in on the process. And then the establishment of a multi-review streamlined process for applications, which is also going to have an impact on staff work. So in terms of the 3 steps on processing, What the legislation does is historically, most of the work that staff does is spread out throughout the project. If there's an EIR, staff typically has a year to 2 years to do all of the consistency reviews and the plan checks and all of that. What SB 330 does is condense all of that work into the front end of the project. So it starts with the preliminary application. We need to prepare a new checklist. The applicants need to provide a brand new set of information, and the city staff needs to review that information that is provided under the preliminary application process. The carrot for the developer, as I mentioned, for filing this new application is that once the information is submitted, the development regulations and development impact fees are frozen. The next step in this process is the permit streamlining requirements. These have always been in effect. They're current state law. Most cities, however, really don't follow them. They're not practical, and from both a applicant developer standpoint and from a city processing standpoint. However, under SB 330, there are now some more severe consequences if those rules are not followed. And so we do think that there will be a resurrection of these Permit Streamlining Act requirements. Under these requirements, the applicant needs to submit a new application, a formal development application with a new set of documentation, and then the city must review that documentation both for completeness. If the city does not review it for completeness, then the SB 330 says that the city can't ask for any additional information, and that's the set of materials that must be reviewed when processing the application. And then the third step of this process is the city, once it receives all of the information required in these two sets of applications, then must review it for consistency with development standards.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Of the city manager. How often do we not review for completeness in 30 days currently?
So you're right. So the Permit Streamlining Act does require us to review it within 30 days. Oftentimes the application is complete, but incomplete in some ways, in which we say this will be addressed later if they haven't provided that. And so there might be placeholders at this to address that comment at a future date if that item was not submitted to staff. And so as Cara mentioned, it does happen over a period of time where we review the application. There may be elevations submitted, then they might submit something in compliance for their green and sustainable building.
I get all that. I'm just asking, how often are we not able to complete that in 30 days? How much is this going to impact us?
So we currently I think we do respond within 30 days, but I will go over in my presentation sort of how the new regulations will impact staff.
Okay. I'll wait. I'll hold my question then. Thank you.
Yes. And so actually, and I think the legal impact of what happens if we don't review in 30 days is that the information that has not been submitted to us technically cannot be considered in a subsequent in the application and in the project. And it's fairly common for developers just not to have their detailed parking plans prepared. And so the implementation of how that is all going to work is something that all cities are really struggling with. And then, of course, the other things that we wanted to emphasize with this new legislation is that the 5 hearing rule is going to be very difficult. That's something that we're going to be talking to the council about how to implement. And we do want and we want community input on that. Which hearings of the hearings that typically are experienced with a project do you want to eliminate? And then finally, the legislation does allow for CEQA compliance and CEQA mitigation measures, and so we will have some discretion in that area. So that's a good news. So I'll end with that, and then we'll turn it over to Deanna, who will go over in more detail the impacts on staff resources. We've also attached this timeline that's been prepared by 21 Elements. It's kind of a work in progress. Everyone is still kind of scratching their heads on how all of this is going to work, but this is our sort of best estimate on how the application process will work in SB 330 land.
We have a follow-up question.
Yeah, actually, it's just a comment, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? These sort of new streamlined protections only apply to large developments, right? And so the state has not created new protections for individuals going through this process. Right?
So for the most part, that's true. It applies to housing projects. But a housing project is defined as, you know, the large projects and the large mixed-use projects, but also it's one of the definitions is any project involving residential units. So our best interpretation is that it could apply to a single-family home, which includes an ADU component. So any, you know, a duplex, there are certainly some smaller projects that can be folded into this. And in that case, you know, I don't know if the, sort of the mom and pop type of applicant would want to go through the SB 330 process, because it does require some more work actually for the developer at the front end. And the benefit, of course, would be that you would be able to lock in development standards, but we don't necessarily anticipate significant changes in those standards unless some of the you know, goals are adopted that do anticipate some changes in residential zoning. So
thank you. Actually, can I ask one more question about it? And this is presumably to table for later, but I'd like the city to think if there's any way with SB 330, I believe it's any project that's 2/3 or more square footage is residential. Is there any way to have, well, my concern is that we've had a number of projects coming forward recently that are essentially luxury apartments, and they are more than 2/3 residential, certainly in one case, and we would like to encourage smaller, more affordable units. And so my fear is that we must streamline larger luxury units. And is there any way that we could put some sort of encouragement to have more smaller units rather than larger units, in considering that it's a 2/3 square footage? Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I think that is a change in the zoning code. And there are certain changes that SB 330 would lock in. And so that type of change in policy could be affected by an SB 330 project. So I think you're right to be thinking of those types of issues. And so there is a relationship between, and this goes more to the substantive element of SB 330, but there certainly is a relationship between changing zoning standards and projects that have submitted an SB 330 application that essentially have vested rights to build the project they submitted.
Thank you. So as Cara highlighted the complexities and the components of SB 330, now that it's become effective on January 1st, we are focused on the procedures and the implementation of it, and how, I'll provide a brief overview of how that is affecting staff as we move forward. as Cara mentioned, the intent of SB 330 is to prioritize and streamline housing projects, but this would impact how we process other projects and services. So just in planning, to provide some context, we have 13 FTE. We currently have 3 vacancies, and we just filled 2 positions within the last 6 months. Our work is primarily focused on development review, both discretionary projects, which come before either the Planning Commission or the City Council, and then also building permit reviews, which are largely ministerial. So if they comply with the development regulations, they receive a building permit. Work that we do is highly regulated. We often follow our procedures and processes that are not only outlined in our municipal code, but also ones that come down from the state, such as SB 330 that we're talking about today, new legislation regarding accessory dwelling units, CEQA, the Permit Streamlining Act, and similar type legislation. So what we do conforms to a nice box. And since the adoption of the El Camino Real Downtown Specific Plan and Connect Menlo, the city has received a number of applications, many of which are under construction today, as you see along the El Camino Real corridor, and we have many projects pending in the Bayfront area as a result of modifications made with the adoption of the general plan in 2016. I'd like to highlight that we have approximately 3,200 residential units under review currently in the city, and of those, approximately 45% are eligible for SB 330. 45%?
Can you be a little more specific about the projects as far as the number of units per project and then which project is under SB 330, please?
Can you put that in context first? So we currently have, I'm guessing, 14,000 residential units?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, so we have, I can't do the math. Yeah, 20% of, our number of units would increase by about 20%.
Right, our residential housing stock. And these are largely results of implementing the changes in the zoning from the El Camino Real Downtown Specific Plan and the modifications to the creation of the new RMU zoning district in the Bayfront area. So these are projects that are consistent with our general plan and the specific plan.
So just to follow up on my question, so you're saying, I know that there's 3,200 residential units coming online. So how
that
many
are under review?
Under review.
Yes.
So how many, one project is 630 units, and is that under SB 330? So can you be, you're coming in. Sorry,
we're coming next, but it might only partially answer your question. So we have recently received 4 applications for SB 330. And these are the projects here highlighted in the shading of the different parcels. 2 of the projects you may be familiar with. So Menlo Uptown is a approximately 483 unit project, and Menlo Portal, which just had its NOP scoping session this past Monday with the Planning Commission. Both of those projects had filed previously and have refiled under SB 330. So what that does for those 2 applications is, as Cara mentioned, it freezes the development standards, it freezes the fees, and we are now processing the projects under the mandated timelines and limited ourselves to the 5 hearings. The projects below, Menlo Flats and the Sobrato mixed use, were filed this week. Menlo Flats is a all residential project, and the Sobrato is a mixed-use project of office and residential. So beyond these projects here, Mayor Taylor, we do have approximately 1,700 housing units that are proposed as part of the Willow Village project. There is another project at the sort of the corner, it's at the bend of Independence, and it's that sort of triangular piece adjacent to the Menlo Portal project. So that is approximately, I think, 110 units, an all-residential project. And then we have a few projects in the El Camino Real Downtown Specific Plan area that are either residential or mixed use.
Thank you. Are any of the projects, the residential projects, submitted under SB 330 downtown?
No, these are the 4
Bayfront.
The 4 that we have currently on file that have applied under SB 330 are all within the Bayfront area.
And the applications that were resubmitted, did they have to pay twice to submit their application? If they submitted it, paid a fee, pulled it, then resubmitted it?
No, the deposit, so as part of the initial application, they pay a deposit, and it's sort of an ongoing cost recovery. And so they switched applications, we stopped that, switched applications, and then the fee would continue, the deposit would fee, and then we would invoice the applicants.
And this is my last question on this. How many of these units are BMR?
So all of the projects here would be subject to our below market rate housing program. So currently it's 15, and they're all above 20 units. So 15% of the 15% of the units would be set aside for BMR. Some of them do have a for sale component, so those would be set aside at moderate income. The rental projects would be equivalent to a low income household. So Cara mentioned some of the items that are required as part of SB 330, and a lot of that is us catching up, getting up to speed, and learning. It's a steep learning curve for staff and working with the city attorney's office. I think there's still questions and clarifications as we move through the process. But the amount of research and review to understand the complex legislation is time intensive, and is taking away staff's time that otherwise would be devoted to other development applications or other projects or building permit reviews. We will need to continue to have ongoing training to identify what the requirements are for our staff so that we can implement it in compliance. And that I not only speak for the planning division, but I will speak a little bit later to what the broader impacts are because development is truly cross department. And then staff will also need to be preparing and posting documentation. I believe we've already completed the first preliminary checklist, so the 4 applications that have filed submitted with the preliminary checklist, which is an application light, if you will. And then as we proceed in the next 2 phases, there are more documentation that is needed from staff to ensure that we are providing the applicant with a comprehensive list of items that are needed so that they can submit a comprehensive application. Absent of us providing that sort of level of detail, our understanding is that we can't ask for it at a later time. So then that portion would be sort of complete, if you will. And so the 2 other pending sort of lists that we're working on is a development checklist, which would build off of our existing development application. So we have a very robust development application, but we need to refine it to reflect the different requirements in the different zoning districts. And then the last checklist would be this very specific detailed requirements. The image there that you see is an example from our specific plan project list, which identifies each and every design standard or development regulation so that we can go through and it's clear that what is required, and then staff can look for it during our consistency review. So the completeness and consistency review, as Cara mentioned, is locked in within 30 days. And also, the components of the project all come in at one time versus over a span of periods. So while we have worked with compliance in our 30-day Permit Streamlining Act, it might be a smaller subset of requirements that we're reviewing each time these come in. And so we're reviewing them on a smaller scale. With SB 330, all of our development regulations, the package would come in at one time and would be more an intensive process for us to review the process. So the priority at that point would be to focus on development review and to meet the mandated turnaround timelines, and then would potentially have impacts on other projects that we're working on. So, and just to highlight, as it's not only the development standards that we're working on, but we're also learning about some of the new development standards, such as, we have to make a historic significance finding earlier on in the process, and we also need to now track incomes if tenants are being displaced. We need to do we need to now add how to address any potential displacement that might be occurring as a result of a development project. So just as a broad overview of development review, there are a number of regulations. This just sort of highlights regulations that are within the RMU zoning district because that is what the 4 applications we have on file are within that zoning district. But this is to shed some light on what the cross-department impacts would be. Not only, people think of land use, we have design and development regulations, but within that, we also look at street improvements and green infrastructure requirements, our parking standards, what our transportation demand management program would be, how are we creating those new connections, our PASEOs that we identified in Connect Menlo. The council also adopted green and sustainable building regulations, which speak to so many different elements of water and zero waste and LEED and sea level rise resiliency. So each of those, you can see there's different departments, different divisions that are affected and that need to do this comprehensive review within a 30-day time period. Our BMR program, our community amenities, where we coordinate with our city attorney, and certainly our city arborist is involved in tree review. So this is just a highlight of some of the requirements, but just to the extent that these components are, sometimes it could be, yes, height 13 feet, check. Some of them are studies that we need to review more in depth. And so trying to compile that within a 30-day period does require us to be more focused on reviewing these projects. So with that, we're happy to take any questions. Our understanding, those, if we do not comply, it essentially becomes a by right development. So having our documentation prepared and being able to review it in a timely manner helps us move not only the projects forward, but projects that the design that sets the standards that that the council has set previously. So, thank you.
If I may just add here that I think planning received on 2 days in December 70 applications for new single-family homes. They are not. In most cases, unless there is a ADU, they will not be covered by these regulations. So, from a policy perspective, the staff would, unless council gives us different direction, put them behind the state mandated requirements.
What do you mean by put them behind?
Last in line.
Do we track how long a project takes to go through the process, and do we have any statistics as to, like, for the last year, how's a typical single-family house took this long?
Yes, we do have that tracking mechanism from the time that it was submitted to the time that, say, they're sort of different. So one is it may go through a use permit process so that we can track that. We can also track, the time that a building permit was submitted and when it was issued. What it doesn't quite show is how long does it take to get something resubmitted. And so that also plays into it. That's not as clear in the data.
So that gets back to my original question, and it's fairly obvious where I'm going with that question. Do we know how many of the projects we don't currently get back to in 30 days? And the obvious I'm going with that is, are we going to run afoul of getting back in time on these because we have, as we've discussed at our last meeting, we're not fully staffed? What is our capability currently? What do we need to be aware of in terms of needs as this is implemented?
Yes, so the projects that I highlighted are primarily, as I mentioned, we have multiple planners. Primarily, a lot of the housing projects and the Bayfront projects are done by 2 planners. And so, and we're receiving more that haven't been assigned. And so certainly staffing resources or the ability for them to potentially share some of the workload would make the ability to focus on compliance more easily done. And so the other projects that you may be referring to, so if we have a use permit that comes in for a single-family house, there may not be as much crossover between someone doing a single-family house versus someone who might be doing a more complex EIR project, but certainly pulling, if we need help on some of the reviews, we'll pull in other staff members, which then could potentially impact timelines on building permit review or a single-family house.
Do we need to be aware of potential staffing issues to meet these requirements?
I think we need to be able to fill our vacancies, and depending upon what other priorities the council has, we may need to look at additional staffing resources.
Okay.
So you've identified 4 SB 330 projects, and so the idea is now that they take priority over, a use permit. That's, but then so are the ones that haven't come in, do they all go then to the front of the line? And so if I'm a use permit and there are SB 330 projects out there that have not yet been submitted, can I expect that those will leap ahead of me in priority?
I think that one reason we're bringing it up is that would be a council policy. I mean, the consequence to not completing the work on the SB 330 projects is that they would have a right to build at some point, and we wouldn't be able to ask for additional information.
So then my second question is, again, back to we have 4 SB 330 projects. Does staff have an idea of what are the unknowns? What are some of the SB 330 projects out there? What does that volume look like that have not yet been submitted?
So of the projects that I mentioned earlier, I believe all but Willow Village could be eligible for SB 330 because Willow Village is not 2/3 square foot residential.
I just want to make sure I understand when it becomes by right. It becomes by right in what's missing. We still have the same architectural controls and everything else, but whatever's missing is no longer required. What actually functionally happens at the end of that 30 days if we miss that?
So the by right component happens in step 3, which is the consistency review. So it might be that we reviewed the height requirements, but say we didn't review the density requirements, and we didn't call out that a specific project was not consistent with the city's density requirements, then the density component of that project would essentially be by right.
Councilmember Mueller.
Sorry, it's so far away. One of the things that we often hear, at least I've heard over the last couple of years, is that both the specific plan and the general plan had a certain amount of capacity for development, and that we're reaching that capacity for development in terms of projects. And those two plans are what SB 330 would apply to, right? Already existing zoning.
Correct, although when we talk about capacity for zoning, we talk about the capacity that was analyzed in the EIR. So there could be, a distinction.
Fair enough. But my question for you is, given the fact that this amount of zoning has already been eaten up in projects that have come toward the city, I'm in forecasting how long we'll actually have this workload. How many years do you expect that you'll be seeing this workload from SB 330?
So with respect to what was studied in the EIR, so interestingly with the projects that you saw, we have reached our cap of what we've studied in the EIR. The last project has exceeded the number of units. And so I think it just depends on what additional work. If we're looking at doing some modifications to the specific plan or to the general plan, and the work can continue. I think every year we're surprised by what regulations come through the state, and so we don't know what's coming next. But certainly beyond just SB 330, I know we're faced with trying to get up to speed with our accessory dwelling units, and so there's always additional workload that we're trying to get up to speed and follow the mandates.
I understand that, but respectfully, my question was, how how long would you forecast we have this work resulting from SB 30?
If I could just weigh in on that a bit. So SB 330 does have a 5-year sunset.
Thank you.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the legislature won't extend it if we're still in a housing crisis, and it doesn't mean that there might be something similar that comes down. But for now, we would expect it to taper off after 5 years.
Or 5 years, or until we have no more zoning upon which to bring projects forward. Because SB 330 applies to existing zoning. It doesn't impose new zoning, as SB 50 would have.
If I may, through the mayor. So just one other. So I think I understand the question. Staff can definitely come back on some of these things. One other thing to keep in mind is at some point in time, we're going to need to update the city's housing element, which will most likely require some rezoning. So, and I think that deadline is 2022. But we could come back and kind of give you a 5-year projection. But I don't think we have all the information today.
But the housing, again, I'm not trying, what I'm trying to do is when we look at resources, look at, okay, and it goes to the mayor's point of multi-year looking out. The housing element has to be completed so we have the regional housing needs allocation, which will come down, and then we have to complete the housing element by a specific date, right, which is within the next 3 years, right?
Yeah, 2022.
2 years. Right, so 2 years.
December.
So anyway, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds of how we go ahead and talk about that policy, but I do see the effects of it taking place right now. Like I just emailed you this morning. I have a gentleman who is, and I'll share this with the council, I don't know. I have a gentleman who emailed me who lives in my district who recently had a surgery and very much needs just to make alterations to his bathroom so that he can put in the appropriate accommodations so he can use it. And he's being told it's going to take a very long time to get through our planning department to do. And so we need to figure out a way to make this more flexible for residents, to Vice Mayor Combs' point. And so, but understanding how long of a duration that we're going to be impacted this way is also important to that analysis. So thank you.
I had a follow-up question, and one related to the zoning. So we're reaching our cap, or are we at our cap for housing being built? And I'm being specific to the M2 area.
So I should clarify it's with respect to what was studied in the EIR.
Okay. And my next question is there opportunity to change some of the zoning districts so that it reflects the need of the population? So just thinking, if there are 2,000 units in that area, there isn't any place to shop, which means everyone would be commuting out for services. So is there an opportunity in that area to rezone so that services could actually exist where they're needed?
So rezone, are you looking to rezone? We wouldn't be able to rezone residential units unless
not the residential, but just the zoning district.
Mm-hmm.
So we
I
have
think
the
we can look at
the
RMU zoning district to potentially increase the allowance for non-residential uses. There's other properties that are non-residential that could potentially look at kind of pare down the permitted uses. So a retail center is allowed in the LS and the O district, but so are other uses too.
So I know that there's a caveat in SB 330. If you downzone in one area, you have to upzone in the other. And that was a point that I made a few months ago. Another piece of that is that I see this as a health and safety situation, even though our attorney said that we couldn't prove that. But putting a large number of residential units in an area that doesn't have the zoning to supply the need for the community, the current community and the new community coming in, I see that as a health concern, especially if we don't, and going back to air quality monitoring from a couple months ago, which have not been installed yet. So I'm just thinking about moving forward. How do we do all of this with SB 330, the housing element, RHNA numbers, so that the area that was identified in the last RHNA was the only area that ended up with development is M2. So no other area of the sites that were identified in RHNA and other areas of Menlo Park was there housing development on, from my understanding. So I'm just trying to figure out how to look at the big picture and how to be realistic moving forward. But thinking about if our theme is quality of life for current residents, quality of life for future residents. How can we change the zoning district so that we can provide services to the existing community and the community coming in, is what I'm looking at. And how does that work? And I'm sorry if I'm talking a lot. How does that work with SB 330? Because I wouldn't want to extend zoning to approve more development in that area, since we're not forced to. And then how does it work with RENA? How does it work with the housing element? How do all three of them work together? Because it doesn't make sense to go at them independently. So it makes sense to do it as a whole, as Councilmember Mueller was talking about last year. A lot. So if you can find my question in that whole statement, I'd appreciate it.
I think we're going to need to come back and consider the conversation and seeing what what the interest in the path is, and then we can figure a way forward to combine some of those items. Looking at the housing element, to speaking towards, I think many of you spoke to how do we increase housing, where are the opportunities for housing, how do we bridge in the transportation and complete the TMP work, that would help provide some of the services and the connections through the neighborhood and increase, improve the quality of life. So I think depending upon where the conversation goes today, then we can be able to provide some information on how to weave the components together.
Along the lines of what we've been talking about, we currently are hitting the cap in the Connect Menlo for residential with the new applications, correct? Are we required, and what that cap is what has been studied in the EIR?
Yes, of the applications that we've received, yes.
Are we required to go beyond that? Which I realize would take another EIR, or can we say that's the cap, we want to stay with that cap, we don't want to increase it more, that's it. Does that then cap where we are with the SB 330?
So it's a difficult question. Housing is certainly protected under SB 330. If we reach the environmental cap, but there are still housing sites that are zoned for housing, say in District 1, where most of the sites are zoned for housing, we have the most unit density. The council could still decrease the zoning in that area, but under SB 330, you would have to rezone in another part of town to make up for that downzoning.
So our so-called caps really don't make a difference?
Can I just chime in? So, my understanding is that with these new projects, we're at a cap, right? Are there additional housing parcels zoned in District 1? Okay.
Yes.
So if one of those parcels, one of those property owners came into you tomorrow with a project for 200 units, what do you tell them?
So we would tell them that they would need to probably do a full EIR to consider the additional housing units that were not previously studied in the Connect Menlo EIR.
But are we required to do, in other words, can we just say no?
No, we can't do that. We can't say no unless you've changed the zoning. But right now, they are zoned. So, for instance, of those 4 projects that were on the board that have filed under SB 330, one of them is being told right now that they've reached the environmental cap and they need to do an EIR. So we have hit that hypothetical already.
And for rezoning, anything that's currently been submitted, we cannot rezone, but anything where there's no pending application, we could rezone at any point until something is submitted for that property. Obviously correct.
Just to clarify, is that a upzone, downzone, or? Because if it's alluding to a downzoning, then that's definitely one approach. If it's an upzoning, that's a different story. So, is the question about a downzoning?
Well, it would not be upzoning in the. So, if we downzone, then we need to find it somewhere else in the city. so we don't actually take units out of the stock. And that's according to the current RENA numbers? Or how does that? Doesn't matter, just the fact that it's been zoned. So at this point, it's zoned, and presumably much of the Bayside area is zoned at 100 units per acre.
And just to clarify,
So-
the zoning allows a greater number of units than what was actually studied in the EIR.
Wait, can you say that one more time?
The number of units that could be yielded from the zoning designation, the zoning, is higher than what was studied in the EIR. That's why you can see parcels that are not fully developed and have remaining parcels that haven't been developed because they're more development potential than what was studied in the EIR.
I guess I would love to do a study session on this in the near future because there's so many questions. Let me go to a different point, and that is what, if you've had a chance, or what policies would you put in place so that you can more efficiently process applications? For example, a historic survey or whatever would be needed, historic assessment, such as design standards, things like that. Can you come up with a list, not right now, of what you would, what would be beneficial to put in place? Because then if there's standards, then that presumably takes a load off of the staff and also of the Planning Commission. So how could we make efficiencies there? And then, and what would it, how much headcount, or how would, just how could we accomplish that in a timely way that would be beneficial, and also provide more standardization and between various planners. And then the second question is, if we were to say we did not want to slow down single-family homes, for example, how would you accomplish that? Would you have two different processes? How many people would you need? How, just how would you go about doing that? I don't expect an answer now. But I would like to know, what, and would that be a short-term need, a long-term need? How would you accomplish it if we say that we don't want to have people wait forever? We want some sort of, we want to be able to give some reliable estimates for timing.
And if I may just clarify for
Sure.
admin members, that is related to multifamily residential projects, being number 2 is specific to single family?
Yes.
Yes.
So just what Councilmember Combs was talking about, and then what Councilmember Mueller was talking about, it's obviously everyone can relate to someone who just had surgery, needs to make changes to their bathroom so that they can live at their home. How do we accommodate this? And obviously there's the extreme of nobody has to wait for everything, and then we'll decide what's reasonable from there. But what would you need? Thank you.
And did you want to go, Nick, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nick Pigueros, Assistant City Manager. I just wanted to highlight that I think one of the questions here ultimately is not necessarily staffing or even money. It's about control, right? What level of control where are the levers of control that need to be adjusted in order to meet the state mandate, as well as providing services to the residents.
And that actually sort of, my question follows up on that a bit, in that for going back to these projects in the M2 that, now that we've reached a cap and have to do their own EIR, in theory, though, these are projects in which we have a lot more control, right? Because there are going to be impacts that you can't mitigate, and the city council is going to have to do one of those overriding mitigation things. And so, in theory, we will have a lot more, even though these applications have to be processed and they have to be given the right to conduct their own EIR, we do have a lot. We do have a lot of control in those situations, right? Or
So Kara could change my answer, but I think because it's under SB 330, just because it requires a full EIR versus a focused EIR, the sort of the review process, the expectations would be the same. So, and just to clarify, the 4 projects that were highlighted, all of those are bonus level projects, so all of those are subject to the council policy to be called up from the Planning Commission. I believe 2 of those involve maps, so they would automatically be reviewed. They are major subdivisions. I think they would automatically be reviewed by the City Council. But so I don't think the process would change because a full EIR is required. It's just a more robust EIR process because they're not tiering as much from the Connect Menlo EIR.
okay. And then my one follow-up question, my other question, again, following up on what Councilmember Mueller was talking about. What are we communicating out to people who have like individual sort of use permit requests and are giving these very long timelines? Are we telling them that like, hey, you know, there are these state mandates which require us to process these larger projects on a specific timeline, and so that's taking up a certain amount of staff resources, and so you're in line behind them? Or are we just saying, you know, we'll get to this in 2021? What's the communication out to residents on this?
Sure. So I think the example that Councilmember Mueller provided was related with a building permit, and so I think it was probably given an expectation of what the timeline would be from a plan checking. And just to highlight on that, we are down a plan. We don't have a permanent plan checker, so we are on contract staff. So that's just another vacancy in our building division, along with vacancies in 2 building inspectors, and so it's not just, it's sort of across our department where we're seeing staffing capacity and resource issues. Because the applications for SB 330 are so new, we haven't even had a chance, I mean, we're trying to understand what the implications are and how we're going to be moving forward with. I think that's why we're trying to bring that forward to you so that there is, transparency and understanding of what we're facing right now, but it's so new to us. Like I said, 2 of them were filed this week. But we will have to be messaging, and setting expectations for other applicants if, these become the priority and there is some delays.
If I can just track back on the first question, I think, and Kara can correct me if I'm wrong, but SB 330 allows only 5 meetings, including consideration of the EIR. So if the developer is doing their own independent EIR for a project, then that has to be included in the total of 5 meetings, including council approval. Or planning commission approval.
My question is, do we have to accept the EIR? Like, please say something I want to hear.
So you remember that bullet on SB 330 that said these projects are still subject to CEQA, and it is built into SB 330. So presumably, yes. The law is changing in this area, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the Housing Accountability Act, which is where a large part of SB 330 is codified, is going to intersect with CEQA, because sometimes there is a tension. But as of right now, yes, you still have your authority under CEQA. You can say, I don't want to adopt a statement of overriding considerations if there are significant unavoidable impacts. But then you have the Housing Accountability Act saying you can't deny a housing project unless you make certain findings. And there is some litigation over this right now.
So, but just bringing it full circle, I would bring your attention back to 2 meetings ago, our city council, where we discussed moving from an LOS standard to a VMT standard, which would have implications when you were looking at an EIR, because it would be easier to meet the VMT standard, right? So there are little tweaks to each thing that you look at in terms of whether or not it's going to actually impact the EIR approval.
My understanding is if we adopt city standards for the VMT as opposed to using the regional standards, which I believe is what we're currently doing, we will have much more control, and that's something that we need to do by the end of June or July.
I have a
follow-up question. How does, if I'm using the right number, AB 686 affect SB 330? So AB, well, I'll let the experts answer what AB 686 is.
Yeah, that's the environmental justice is what you're talking about, and there's another. Yes. So that kicks in when there's a general plan amendment, and so SB 330. I think I view them as separately. If the city were to change the general plan, then you would have to comply with 686, but then there might be some restrictions on some of the changes that you make that would impact projects that qualify under SB 330. So we'll have to look at that issue as well in processing the SB 330 projects.
Can we actually get a legal memo on that, please?
Sure.
If there are no other questions, then we can continue to the public input, part 2.
Our public speaker is Ryan Price.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Price. I'm the chair of the Environmental Quality Commission here in Menlo Park, speaking on behalf of the EQC. So we appreciate that the city has diverse needs. At the same time, the urgency of our climate emergency calls us to act. In December, shortly after the city declared a climate emergency, the EQC's CAP subcommittee set out to address the climate crisis and require GHG reductions here in Menlo Park. The process they followed included collaboration with city staff, tapping into experts from around the world, and attending conferences. They covered a range of topics, including sea level rise, carbon sink technologies, seawalls, electric heat pumps, and effective incentive programs. In addition, the subcommittee gathered best practices from cities leading around the world. As the subcommittee investigated, they discovered the true cost, and we ask you to consider that as you look at your priorities for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. I think you weren't here earlier when we announced that we have public comment down to 1 minute.
That's okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we all have the Environmental Quality Commission cap at our place. Thank you.
This time I'd like to call Robert Jones, followed by Jim Lewis.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Jones, and I'm currently the 2020 board president for the Menlo Park Fire Protection District. And we would like to submit to the City Council. The fire chief sent over to, I don't know if the city manager got it, 8 points of areas where we would like to work with the Menlo Park City Council on their goals, is make that part of your goals for this year. We think, and I was looking at the 4 areas of safety, housing, transportation, and climate that you are focusing on. The 8 areas that we have concentrate on 3 of the 4 areas. If you move forward with those particular areas. So we would like for further consideration of that letter. If you don't have it, I have a copy here for you to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you, President Jones.
Mayor Taylor and members of the council, I'm Jim Lewis. In preparing for today's meeting, I reviewed the letters submitted to the City Council's CCIN website. One topic that jumped out at me was about the topic of public safety submitted by a number of residents, and more specifically, the need for an emergency operations center, which we do not have, and a disaster preparedness community plan, which has been started but is very, very old and needs to be updated. Frankly, with the potential of terrorism, pandemics, active shooters, earthquakes, floods, and wildfires, the need for this type of safety planning couldn't be higher. If the term safety first is going to have any meaning whatsoever, I encourage you to include safety as one of your 5 top safety goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I have one more. Katie Baruzzi.
Hi, I'm Katie Baruzzi. I'm the chair of the Complete Streets Commission. I'm not going to reiterate our commission's goals or preferences for you because I delivered those in our recent council meeting. But I do want to emphasize that a lot of these things that you're looking at have been looked at in separate columns, but they're really very intersectional. Safety policy and climate policy and housing policy and social justice policy are deeply interconnected. And so taking some of these immediate term measures like looking at VMT and updating our city standards for that will make our streets safer. It will help improve climate change and support the goals of the EQC and the goals of this council, and will also contribute, in rezoning so that we can have denser housing in other areas besides the Bayside. I really would appreciate seeing that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baruzzi. Are there any other public comment speakers?
Michael Bostic, you can go right on up.
Greetings to the council members. Michael Bostic. I represent the east side of Menlo Park, and I just wanted to bring up issues of equality, government equality with the members on the other side of Menlo. I understand everything that's going on. We have the numbers, you know. I'm trying to represent and do what my mom's legacy was back in the day, you know, on the other side. And we're trying to get the community together, and we want to be a part of everything that's going on and just understand what's, you know, what would be best for not just this side of Menlo Park, but the other side of Menlo Park, and bring all of us together. Because together we can do more. We can do anything and everything. So we're here to bring the masses together, bridge the gaps, and hopefully Menlo Park, we see what's going on. It's going to make it that much bigger. We see this is going to be the biggest little town in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call for public comments for right now. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for the input once again. Now we would like to open for a City Council roundtable discussion. And we have 3 questions we want to use as guide questions to focus on particular topics. And the questions are the following. Number 1, how do we want to prioritize new state mandates like SB 330, ADU, etc.? The second one is, what opportunities exist to use our advisory bodies to support progress toward the 2020 priorities and work plan? And finally, what 3 projects do you think promote the greater good of the entire community and why? Again, how do we want to prioritize? What opportunities do we have toward the priorities and work plan? And 3 projects do you think would promote the greater good of the entire community and why?
When you say which 3 projects, do we have a list to choose from?
3 projects you think promote the greater good of the entire community.
So are we talking projects or goals?
Would have been good to have a list of related projects.
What does it take to implement GAR? In other words, does that need to be one of the 3, or is that something that is more of a value for the city to join?
A little bit of both, but I think that it's the application process. So as an example, to join League of California Cities, you sign the application, you send them a check, and you're done. Then they send you information, right? GAR is more in-depth, and they are trying to accomplish culture change within the organization. So it's not a one-year process. I don't know how long it would take, but it's an ongoing and deep process. So the application process will take some time, but the culture change will also take a lot of time. It will be a big project/priority. But we don't intend to have community and development in charge of it, so it's a good priority.
See, that's the thing. In previous years, we've had lists of projects that were outstanding and what staff was related to each one so that we could say, look, within this division of staff, these are our top things we'd like to, within the environment staff, these things, within the community, these things. And that way we didn't overload one or the other, but we also had a better, because my fear is because we don't have them in front of us, we're going to come back next week and say, oh, we forgot. There was this other one that's really important too, because we have so many moving parts in the city. We have so many different projects. I think we have a list of like 50 on the short list, 71 on the short list.
Capital
so
projects,
off the top of my head,
well, I understand your point. I think we were prepared to present a lot of information on functional work areas of the departments and the divisions, but I think, and I'll let the mayor speak to this herself, she was really more interested in hearing the council and the public's discussion on what was of interest to them. We can put together the information that we've heard today and come back and make our best recommendations based on your input. So and further, it's not I think as you well know with all your experience, it's not a one-off opportunity. I think we're not thinking necessarily that today is the final conclusion of your opportunity to set goals, but rather to give us an indication of what's most important to you, and then we will bring that back for you to reconsider.
I think you refer to my experience, my vast experience of 7 years, but nonetheless, what often happens is we have our goals, and then there's a crisis or an emergency, or there's the golden shiny ball appears, the opportunity that we can't say no to. There's this unknown factor that every year is something. And so we almost need to underutilize our time just to prepare, because it's always something. And we just had at the last city council meeting something that we hadn't planned on. Oh, but this is a fantastic grant. Won't it be wonderful for everyone? Yes, we're going to prioritize and do this. And so, I don't know, I'm just saying keep in mind there's always something every year.
Yeah. So I would agree it's difficult to say when you get down to a project level when you don't have the list of current projects and what projects may be impacted one or another, because you have first tier and second tier and third tier, which is helpful to know within that guidepost, because then it could be a scrum later on in the year, not knowing. So I would like to revisit that at some point. But that being said, I do think the way that this has been organized is helpful in that as the conversation has gone on, I really was able to guiding, I realize now when people are talking about goals, it's really in the beginning, and perhaps former Mayor Robinson was touching on that, but when he called it a goal, I think of it now I'm okay, what are the guiding principles? So when I'm thinking about guiding principles, I'm thinking about, and we don't often talk about it, but a guiding principle for me systemically, I think that our residents expect is that we are protecting and preserving our school and improving our school systems. A lot of the times it's funny we don't think about that, but when it comes down to actual decisions, when I'm thinking about it systemically, I'm thinking, although we don't make decisions about our schools in terms of funding, one of the things I always tell people is one of the number one things that I think people expect from me as a council member is not to screw up the school district, because that's why people have moved here into this city, a lot of people. The other would be to protect and improve quality of life for residents systemically, and Councilmember Combs touched on that, and everyone's touched on that. I think that's something that we talk about, and I think thirdly, I think improving our climate action plan across what we're doing in terms of planning. And then fourthly, to make sure that we're doing all of these things with equity in mind and building an affordability component into all of that. Those are the guiding principles of what I think about, or as I'm approaching the next year. I still think systemically from, looking on the first question, how do you need to prioritize new state mandates? I think it's almost a rhetorical question. Obviously, given where we are at the current state mandates, they have to be prioritized. I think it really comes down to questionally, from an operations perspective, how do we carve out and not lose current city services while we do that, right? I think it's an operational question. We have these new mandates. How do we continue to provide city services such, going back to the guiding principle, that we're not negatively impacting quality of life? Going back to the gentleman who's recently had the surgery. So I think that question is somewhat rhetorical. I think we have to prioritize them. But opportunities exist to use our advisory bodies to support progress. I think that's always, like, for instance, working with the EQC, they provided us a ton of great work product to look at. I think there are plenty of opportunities to exist. I think it just requires a healthy relationship with those advisory bodies to understand. And I think we have this ongoing dialogue that they are advisory, and so what are the expectations there? Because holistically, we look at all of that in context in terms of everything else that's happening in the city. But I think that over the course of the last year, I think that those relationships on that subject point have improved, candidly. But I think that there's a level of transparency in that. And then what 3 projects? Again, I do want to see the list, because I do think it's not just what 3 projects, but I think there's a bigger discussion there. But I do think, looking at, for me, basically looking at the downtown transit area renewal is something that I think our residents are focused on. I think there is ability to add housing in there. And we've talked about that as a council, of wanting to do that, especially through the regional housing needs allocation process that's coming, looking to expand that envelope of where we look for that. I also do think the residents expect that we're looking at improving the amenities downtown and, very frankly, doing some much-needed maintenance downtown, which we've discussed. I don't know if you guys know this, but Councilmember Nash and I have met with the city manager and talked about we need a maintenance schedule for the downtown, an ongoing maintenance schedule for renewal. That would basically, okay, when are we going to replace the bricks? When are we going to look at this block? When are we going to look at the next block, and have that put into an ongoing cycle where it's not just spot and patch. I do think, and then I just go back to looking at the general plan, specific plan, in those areas that we need to make it work. I know that that was something that we started to talk about last year, but now that we have the settling of what's come down from the state and we can understand that, how do we make that work, but not just from a development perspective, but from that transportation perspective. That's a lot. Those two things are a lot. You know, and I know within that we have this timeline for the Facebook library, but then it's like a rhetorical question. Of course, that's a priority project because it has to be done within the next 6 months. But the general plan, the specific plan, looking at how we now modify those to make those tweaks that are that we've all talked about need to be looked at with the overarching, going back to the overarching principle of how does the climate master plan affect that? How does protecting our schools weigh into that? How does the quality of life, equity, and affordability weigh into those projects? So I hope that makes sense. I always worry that in a discussion like this, you could sound like you're rambling. So and I also hate to do this, but Mayor Taylor, I think I need that break.
I know.
All right.
I'm confused what you mean with, okay, and we can do this after just to get the question out there, is I don't understand the school systems given the area which City Council has jurisdiction over, and given how much we have on our plate, I'd love to know more when you get back about what you're talking about with school systems.
Yeah, happy to explain it. I mean, basically, our school systems have their own, forecasting for student allotment and what they have in terms of capital build out, and then so you have capacity issues, and then on top of that, you have their budgetary constraints. And so then when we make decisions, we impact each other. And so making sure that we're in concert with them and making sure that, so for instance, right now some of the schools really they'll tell you they don't have room to actually build up. Like they've reached capacity. And so how do you impact that in a way so you can sit down with them? Like when we did, another great example is when we negotiated the Stanford development, and I was on that subcommittee, we talked about how do we go ahead and make an increment such to offset the increase of students that would come in. And so we were making sure that during that time period, and so we actually had to take money from the city coffers and give that to them because there was no tax revenue in that circumstance, so it didn't hurt them. So, but we'll dive into it more when I get back.
Okay.
So, Mayor Taylor, are we going to take a 20-minute break?
Okay. The break is supposed to be at 3:20, but if the group needs the break now, we'll go.
I'll be calling the meeting back to order in 1 minute, so if you could take your seat. Okay, we are on our last leg of the goal-setting meeting for today, and we will continue with the roundtable discussion with the council. And Vice Mayor Combs, you had your light on, and we did not get to you, so I want to follow up.
I did. So it was actually a question for staff. So in the past, in sort of connection to these opportunistic projects that show up, I think that there has been some response that that included, hiring ahead specifically in relation to that project. I think, was this the case with the gift connected to the possible library on the Burgess campus, that there had been start the process of someone being hired specifically in connection with that. Have you guys pursued that as a possibility in connection with an opportunistic project that might have arisen recently and looks to consume lots of staff time going forward?
Well, I think some of the other staff will weigh in on this, but we had really a rare opportunity to utilize Justin Murphy, who has been both Public Works Director and the Assistant Community Development Director. And so Justin is able to bring a breadth of subject matter knowledge to this project, and I think can execute more quickly and more efficiently than anybody we could hire. We may need later to try and backfill for him, but we are also fortunate to have internal staff, both Nikki Nagaya and Deanna Chow, who have been in their interim positions for about 6 months or somewhat more now. So we have not had time to think yet about how to backfill some of that because we're so busy working on the project. But I appreciate the question, and I think we will be thinking about it.
And then just a question for my fellow council members, and definitely let me know if this is not the most appropriate time, but just so I can sort of ground the discussion in my own mind, the staff recommendations, is there a sense among the council that yes, everything on there is something that should be a priority? Or are there things on there that there is some consensus or majority that should not be a priority? Because that would be interesting to hear. And I could possibly be swayed on something if there were arguments that were to be made.
Could we have a list of the items are?
Mr. Peguero is going to put the priorities that the staff have recommended on the screen.
So I thought of a really good metaphor for this when I was speaking at the break, because my daughter's going into high school next year, and we've got the mandated classes, and then she has to figure out what her electives are. Same thing. Sometimes we act like we have a choice when we really don't. So I think maybe we should look at this as these are the classes we have to take, and these are the 2 periods that we can fill. How do we want to fill those? Because a lot of the things that come before us, I used to wonder, why is this even before us? We don't have a choice. And because legally we have to stamp the box, even though legally we can't not stamp the box. So it'd be interesting to know where are the elective classes that we can fill in, and which are the mandated ones we don't really have a choice, or which ones have we already said we're going to do, and we may not be legally obliged, but we're otherwise obliged, as in the library.
Well, I think we have to comply with the state mandates, or that would be my recommendation.
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, that's what I'm saying. These are the mandated courses we have to take.
So then the other priorities that we're proposing to you are the completion of the Transportation Master Plan, which others can correct me, but I think we judge to be 80% complete at this point. Continued work towards the Middle Avenue rail crossing, which I think is very important to the community.
Okay, so again, I wanted to point out to people, we have $5 million riding on us completing that on time. So that's another one that we've made an agreement. We have a lot of money that kind of mandates us finishing that.
And we strongly recommend that we continue with the Information Technology Master Plan implementation, and then, of course, the mandated planning and zoning updates and studies. And if I could, I think that the staff broadly supports most of, if not all, of the suggestions that others have made today. All of those are fabulous opportunities. Climate change initiatives, joining GARE, and just all the others. We would completely support that, but we only have so much time, and so which things should we focus on? Not to say we won't work on anything else, but what can we focus on?
So again, sometimes we have projects that are directly related to our planning department. Some are related to our environmental department. And often they interlink, but sometimes not. So where we can work on climate goals, where we have bandwidth, for example, in the environmental quality department, I think we have consensus that that's one of our areas that we'd like to focus in on.
Just to respond to that, and this is sort of just a general understanding on my part. We have two people in our sustainability group. Well, one is working on policy-oriented initiatives, and one is working on implementation initiatives. And they're both very hardworking employees and very committed to sustainability. So to the extent that we want to pursue additional initiatives, that will take more bandwidth.
So I think we have a lot on our plate, and I think we can't just accept the answer that no, we can't do anymore. I think what we have to find out is how can we accomplish this? We need to move forward on several different pieces, and I just will not accept no as an answer, very honestly. I fully believe that our current staff can't do it. It's just what other options do we have? I'll get back to that in a minute. First of all, I want to say I think we need to review all of the CIP items and what we do and whether those fit in our current resource-limited environment. A lot of those were approved prior to this council even being together, and we should be making smart choices there and possibly delaying quite a few of those or switching out for others. I also think we need to look at what services do we provide around the city and what is it taking to do that. And then there's a whole nother step. Once we decide what services we want to provide, how do we get from here to there? I don't want to deal with that right now. I just think at some point we need to, and I also realize that this takes resources to get this information, but I think the council should be looking at what services we provide around the city, at what levels, and what is the cost recovery percentage for those services. Because I hear that one that obviously jumps out is we have 7.95 FTEs in gymnastics. I also hear that that's something where we get full cost recovery. But it's a decision that we need to make, and it's not to get people concerned that we're going to take away the gymnastics program. It's just, are there other ways to provide it where we might be able to use those FTEs more in a different way? Is that something that we want to do? Does it make sense? How do we want to approach the services that we provide in the city? And I think that that's something that we need to do across the board and look at given this environment where we have a lot of state mandated rules that we need to implement, what are we going to do? Having said that, I think that there was strong consensus on that we need to do something on housing and looking at the plans. As part of the Stanford General Use Plan, Mayor Taylor, City Manager Jerome Robinson, and I all had very good experiences with the group, the M Group, which managed the GUP for Santa Clara County. I would like to propose that we hire them to do the zoning and the updates, realizing that it's something that I would love to have staff do, but we cannot fit that into the puzzle, and this is a way to accomplish it with a group that has a known track record. My understanding is that they already have a contract with the city. In fact, we've already hired 2 of their people into full-time positions in the planning department. Jeff Bradley has said that they would love to work with the city more, and I would like to get possibly some agreement tonight to go in that direction so that we can move the housing in the city and the zoning ahead despite all of the demands on our existing staff. It's just a different avenue.
So we can definitely look into that. We do have purchasing and procurement policies that we would need to follow, which doesn't mean that they wouldn't be highly qualified and a great applicant. So, but we still have to go through some kind of process.
How can we expedite that? So we've discussed this for 2.5 months, realizing there's been a lot of other things on the plate. I think it's a time where we need to have some action. And a lot of what's going on with SB 330 will be affected by what we do with the zoning. A lot of our housing demands are the quality of life for our residents has to do with housing, our transportation, climate change, everything is tied up in that. I think that this is a way to move it ahead, and whatever we can do to move it ahead as quickly as possible, I would like to push.
I appreciate that. And so just while Councilmember Nash has the floor, if you could give me a sense of a budget that would be within the range of acceptability to the council, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million.
I think that that's up to staff, and very honestly, I'd be happy to work on a subcommittee to come back with, I'd be happy to do the outreach on that, come back with it if you give me the parameters of what you need, if that's something that would be a stumbling block for, because of staffing resource constraints, I'd be happy to work on that. I don't know if that's appropriate, but basically, I don't know until I see what the scope of the project is, but we have discussed how we actually do have a large amount of money in the coffers, and I cannot think of I haven't tried to think of a better use, but I think this would be an excellent use of this money.
Okay, I'm just trying.
Can I ask a question? Because my understanding is that through the regional housing needs allocation process and the housing element, we're going to be looking at. My understanding is through. I'm going to need a larger one of these. My understanding is that through the regional housing needs allocation process and the housing element update, we're going to be doing this work. And I believe that work is included in the mandated planning and zoning update. I could be wrong, but that's going to be happening within the next 2-year period. So what I'm trying to understand is I hear this discussion between back and forth view is, well, there's going to be a budget for that. And I don't know if that's included in this year or next year. I think we're starting that process this year is my memory. And so the question would be, and that's a staff recommended priority that staff was going to work on anyway. So I guess the question is, do we need the increase in staffing for that, or is there some other place? Do you see what I'm saying? Well, it's one of the staff recommended priorities is the mandated planning and zoning updates. I assumed that included RENA, or that was one of the staff recommended priorities this year since we have to start the process this year. Was that not the case? So we are going to, so within the staff recommended priorities, presumably we'd be staffed up for that. Is there something that, and part of that is looking at where those numbers go within the updated housing element, right? So the question, when I look at all of these things, I don't think that we aren't staffed up for housing. What I see is we're staffing up for housing. How do we continue to provide the services? Because staff will be working on the housing issues. How do we provide the services that might be, and Jess and I have talked a long time, maybe you guys can shed some light on this. What's the thing that we don't have capacity for? And with all due respect, that's the thing that I've been confused when people say we need resources for housing. Like, I actually think that's what people are working on based on what the state mandates are. What sounds like to me is getting further and further on the back of the line is actually resident services that have been delivered to date.
Let's see. So, I mean, there's multiple components of that, and the one thing that I'm not sure if you want to think about it in 3 buckets, maybe. You think of long-range planning, which would be the housing element and some of those associated things, and some of those are mandates. Then there's the SB 330 current multifamily projects, and then the single family. So I think what Deanna was presenting earlier, and Cara, there was a focus on the SB 30 multifamily, and that's kind of what we're just experiencing right now. We talked about some of the impacts of single family. The thing that we were hoping to come to the council with around this time, but and there, I can point to a staff report from the fall that lists about 6 items or so related to community development. We are not currently today staffed up to pursue those housing projects. The long-range planning, let me use that category. Long-range planning, we are not currently staffed for that. We were going to come to you with a plan for that, and we're not there yet. So we would need to kind of come with, I'll say, a multi-year plan that we kind of talked about earlier, how we would deliver that service, what impacts there would be. And again, as we talked about before, there's a combination of consultants, full-time staff, it's that package of things and what some of the trade-offs are. So there's no funding for it right now to my knowledge. So there'd definitely be even if it was full consultant services, there would be a funding request. It's not budgeted now. All right. So I think we're using today, as the city manager said earlier, we're using today's meeting to get some input, and then we have to come back to the council with what the the roadmap would be to achieve those.
Right, and so that impacts the discussion that both of you are having, because if we pick mandated planning and zoning updates, this is going to happen and is already planned to happen, that you're going to come to us and say, we have to do the housing update, we have to do the arena numbers, we have to figure out where we're going to put it, and this is and how much budget do we have available, whether or not we staff up with full-time, with FTEs, provisional FTEs, or a consulting or a contractor. We're going to have that discussion at that time if we say we're moving forward with the mandated planning and zoning updates, because we're already being pushed in that direction. It's not a pull, it's a push. It's happening. It's already happening. So the question, so I mean, what am I missing?
I don't think that you're missing anything. Going back to Councilmember Nash's comment and question, my interpretation is that you're looking at short range, and Councilmember Nash is looking at short range. Councilmember Nash is looking at how can we do zoning amendments that will benefit us right now, and you're talking about the long range as far as what the not SB 30, the RENA numbers, the housing element. And so that's the way that I'm understanding it. But I have some follow-up questions.
But I think it has to do with the fact that you look at land use issues, guys, because there is no, if you're looking to upgrade, if you're looking to upzone for housing, you're more than likely being pushed into an EIR. Or you're doing it, you're doing it through your RENA numbers, unless you can't, you can do some spot. You might be able to do some spot work, but when you're looking at like a general, like a specific plan area or something like that, you're more than likely looking, there's a certain threshold upon which, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but there's a certain threshold upon which you're really looking at something that is technically falls into sort of a long-range project, because you have the impact that it may cause. It may trigger an EIR or transportation.
That complicated. Just looking at, I have the zoning here, and just the way that they read, it's 1 or 2 sentences. And so, going back to what Councilmember Nash was saying, looking at our zoning, where can we do some simple fixes that will improve whatever's happening around housing in the city of Menlo Park today, and looking at long range. But my question goes to, at least that's the way I'm interpreting what you're saying. My question is around the consultants and contractors. If we have around 244 contractors and consultants, if I read the chart right that was in our staff report, it said we had 531 paid employees in that chart. That's incorrect?
Well, it is correct, but I think it's so important to distinguish. It's 531 or 2 W-2s issued, and
Okay.
some of those W-2s are issued to 15-year-old kids who work in the summer
Okay.
camp program.
So how many contractors and consultants do we have, just roughly?
I don't know. We'd have to come down. with
Okay,
that.
so just thinking about the number of contractors and consultants and what are they specifically doing for the city. So if we have, the M Group is already working for the city and they're obviously working on planning. And so what does their contract say? What service do they provide for the city? And can we amend it to include something specific that is being requested from one of the council members if they get support from 2 other council members? So that's what I kind of interpreted, what you were saying.
Can I turn that around a little
Yes.
bit? I guess, so, not to get into an individual contract, but tell us what you want. We want to work on the specific plan. We'll come back with a budget, and we'll look into available consultants and go from there.
So what I for myself and what I've understood with Councilmember Nash is that the hope is that it can be simple. It can be more simple than that. If we tell you what we want, so in my brain, I'm trying not to go back to the moratorium, but the request was look at the land use policy, pick one. How can we change it, amend it in order to fit what's needed today? Things have changed, and so thinking about if staff capacity, we can't at the moment. Staff is at capacity. We're not feeling what we need in planning. So if we have a consultant that is already working in planning, how can we utilize someone that's already existing within Menlo Park's contracts? And so how do we use our current consultants or contractors to fill the needs that we're missing now? Simply, as opposed to, we'll create a list and then you go back and look at the list, just trying to figure out how to minimize the amount of work that will go into getting the requests that we're asking for.
So maybe I'm overthinking this. And but are we talking about how to get the resources, or are we talking about changing the zoning?
Well, both, because it would take resources to change the zoning.
All right. Can we? All right. Go ahead.
Answer it now, but just to where our brains are at the moment.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, I think that to Councilmember Mueller's question on the need to do the housing element, the RENA, the SB 330, I think what we're seeing with this legislation and the impacts that it's having on us is the state is more and more dictating our daily operations. They're saying that you need to perform according to this schedule, or you lose complete control for SB 330, or you lose control for SB 330. Housing element. There's new teeth in the housing element that doesn't give us the time necessary to do the per se exhaustive public process that's necessary to have a successful housing element process. And if we don't perform, then there are consequences, very significant consequences, if we're not ready by December of 2022. So I think that the reason this is on here is that we need to adapt, we need to figure out how are we going to do this, and we were never staffed to do this type of work. We've always used consultants to a varying degree, but we don't have staff who sit around for 7 years waiting for the housing element process to come back up. Add to that new demands that we have to turn projects around in 30 days or have significant changes or significant comments in a specified time frame. Our daily operations are being dictated by a law that is outside this room and we can't change. That said, the biggest issue, I think, with all of these projects is community engagement. That's where the technical piece is relatively straightforward. I think to the comment that you made, what are the easy changes to the zoning? That's not the issue. The issue is the community engagement, building community buy-in, and addressing the various needs.
I'm trying to say this as diplomatically as possible.
We have been waiting for over 6 months to get something moving on the housing front downtown. We tried the moratorium, that did not work. Fine. We did a subcommittee. Nothing has happened, and we're trying to get something moving. We have two issues. One is we need more housing downtown. Two is we need to have more services, and perhaps if we can, we need more services in the Bayside area. More services. We need services in the Bayside area. It's the only way that the new housing that's coming to us through SB 330 will work. We even one of the Andrew Morcos, one of the developers, spoke to this. We need to get services in the Bayside area. We also have an interest in looking at the zoning there to better, to possibly downzone the additional housing, the additional available housing there, realizing it has to go somewhere else by state mandate. The city staff is wonderful. They're stretched too thin as it is, especially with openings, as you know, given what we were doing, much less now we have all this SB 330s on rules on top of it. So something has to give, or we just have to continue to wait in line. I'm not willing to wait in line. I want to figure out how can we do this. Short of asking, I don't want to put more burden on staff. One thing, maybe if Mayor Taylor and I could form a subcommittee, unless someone else wants to be on it, and spend 10 hours with the consultant and just test out some ideas and see if there's anything there. I know that I'm really a novice in land use, and although I'm doing everything I can to learn about it. Perhaps there's, is there anything there as far as what we've been talking about for 6 months? Something that we could do, which could therefore move housing ahead in the downtown area and anyway, you've heard. So can we do some sort of, have some sort of short-term meeting with the consultant and see if there's anything there, because maybe we don't have anything, but both of us firmly believe that there's some areas there where we could make some difference to the city and the quality of life of our residents. I hear what Councilmember Mueller is saying, and yes, all of this will feed into the long-range plan, but we've got just a dire situation right now with our housing and jobs imbalance, and we need both short-term solutions as well as the longer-term solution, which will be state mandated and that we are all going to need to do.
Yeah, so I don't want you to interpret that I'm against what you're saying. I'm not against what you're saying. What I'm saying is that what I'm trying to point out is the practical reality of what will happen, of what happens. So I'm not against it. I think we do need to put in housing, but what I don't, and while I was trying to do was, frankly, try to mediate what I thought was a discussion that candidly could not be solved in that moment. The issue, in terms of picking the and I'm just going to point out, in terms of like picking this contractor, that usually would need to have a framing from the council to look at, set a budget, go through an RFP process of at least 30 days so you follow best practices, so that, because that's the way RFPs work. And so, I'm happy, as a colleague, I'm happy to say to you, in order to further these interests, go ahead and set it on the agenda, work with staff to get that up, to look at these issues. But my concern is, at the end of the day, what I think we're not, and I'm not saying that, I'm not arguing against that we need to do this. I'm saying, as a practical reality, one of the issues that you're going to have if you try to shortcut the process is you may find yourself triggering CEQA and triggering an EIR, or triggering a looking at the transportation or the transportation impact. And you can try to work with the consultant to see if you can get around that. Candidly, I'd be surprised if you could, because I remember that whole process in the specific plan for only 640 units. So, but that being said, if you guys want to try to bring something in front of the council that says we want to work with the contractor to try to pursue these aims and narrow it down, and then staff can give a proposed budget for that, sure, it's great. What I don't want to have, my only concern is, I think what will end up happening when you get to the end of that road is you may end up in a redundant process to a process that is already taking place. Because candidly, the RENA process is already on an expedited, shortened timeline, even with the outreach taking place. And I know it seems crazy that the 2-year process for this is expedited, but that is expedited. I remember the last housing element when we went through that and what that took, and man, the arguments that took place in that throughout the city. And so anyway, that's my only point.
Councilmember Carlton.
All right, so 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago, of course when I was 5, I used to be a business process reengineering person, for showing my age, starting with Lotus Notes and to rolling out SAP across Philips in Asia. And I know for a fact what we used to do with these little flowchart things that you see. We would say, the contract goes here, the approval process, then it goes there. We would follow all the business processes, and we would find ways where, is this absolutely necessary? And the reason why they change management, people make the big bucks, is because people hate change. So first of all, we have to be ready, if we go through this process, to make changes, to not care what color someone paints their front door, to actually streamline things. And I know for a fact that by using, and I know there's an old joke with staff that when I talk about changing the process, everyone gets to drink, because I've been saying this for years. But this is when you get into the IT master plan, where if I'm going to fix my sidewalk, I don't have to take a bunch of staff time to deal with me. I can click, click, click. It goes online, and staff can deal with the more complicated things. And kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit on this is the IT plan for the land management, so that things can work more functionally. Once you start getting into peeling the onion into the real processes, that almost takes, I've seen very experienced people nearly have nervous breakdowns trying to do their day job and help with the process. It is a huge effort to go through. What I see is happening with the IT plan will give us the low-hanging fruit on that. What you're saying, I completely agree with, but I just want to explain, having done that as a career previously, it takes years and even more staff. Now, when you come out of it, it's great, but it's a huge process to go through to really clean up those processes. And just to laugh at ourselves, we have to stop second-guessing ourselves. 2 weeks ago, we had a moratorium on hiring until we reviewed that. And then at the same time, we come back and say, oh my God, we need to hire more people. I would like us to work more clearly on, to your point, if we're not going to take no for an answer, tell us what it takes. Instead of saying no, maybe sometimes say yes if. Like, yes, we could do that if we had 10 people here. Yes, we could do that if we had this budget. And that way we can, instead of just feeling like, to Councilmember Nash's point, instead of having to say, here, just no, help us better understand why. And then we can decide, do we really want to go there to make that happen? We can make more informed decisions. Am I correctly interpreting?
No.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I spent 12 years at Genentech. The last 2 years was at reengineering the medical affairs department, so I'm well aware of what needs to happen. Second of all, what we're talking about is not reengineering the specific items that you were talking about, which I believe do need reengineering, but those are things that need to go on for SB 330 and to streamline our processes, to get the better website, things like that. We are trying to get housing for our residents downtown soon. We can't wait for the RENA numbers where we don't want to wait. We've been waiting and waiting. This is a real crisis for people. They're getting displaced. We need more housing. We need more affordable housing. One thing that I would like to do is somehow, and maybe we can even talk to the consultant, see if there's some other way we can do it. I just want to explore some things. There are issues that I don't think will take an EIR. Maybe I'm wrong, but the consultant can help us. And I don't want to take the staff time because I don't think they are so overburdened as it is. They've got plenty on their plate, if for no other reason, just looking for more staff and trying to get all the projects through and take care of the person who needs their bathroom upgraded. I mean, these are real life issues that people are dealing with. I want to try and somehow take this outside, just check with a knowledgeable consultant, someone who's been doing this, and see whether any of the ideas that we have might work, where they won't. Some definitely will trigger an EIR. There's definitely some, that's no doubt in our future. But there's also some things that can happen, perhaps, that would actually get the logjam, get things unblocked now. I've waited 6 months. I'm not willing to wait further. The residents elected us to take action, not to just wait to respond to the state mandates.
Which gets me back to my point, and I'm sorry if that got lost. Let us know what it would take. And if it takes more people, tell us. Let us make informed decisions on if we really need to get to X, what is it going to take to get there? Because I agree. I would like us to start moving forward. We are moving forward. I would like to pick up the pace.
Can I just, first of all, I'd be completely supportive of a subcommittee with you and the mayor, or some sort of specific engagement involving you and the consultants. I don't know how that gets formulated, but one in which you guys get to interact directly with the consultants, if that's allowable, I totally would be supportive of it. But I think my question is that would not the most effective route to go would be for, if we're talking about sort of like housing downtown, would be for you to ask staff, give me a list of the parcels and the owners of all downtown, and then you just going and dialing for dollars and saying, hey, what does it take for you to develop your land? What looks good for you, or what sort of density do you want, or what's constraining you at the moment? Because I do think that, like, if we go to the consultants are not delivering housing; they're delivering processes, and maybe it may be a more efficient process. But let's go directly to the owners of these land of these parcels and see what's holding it up, and that's something that you can do. Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, I mean, again, guys, and I'm not arguing against you at all. Like, if we can figure out ways to do it, but I am trying to, like, expectation-wise, we just talked about earlier in the day that there are specific plan caps, and beyond those caps, the EIRs are limiting. So I'm not arguing against you guys at all. I'm just trying to set what expectations probably would be initially. Is that once you've hit those caps, you're going to trigger an EIR in those areas.
And I just to give voice to what I think is partly at the heart of Councilmember Nass's frustration. One of the things that on the subcommittee that we were part of talked about was what are the ways we can optimize and get the remaining housing for the downtown specific plan that we haven't gotten, right? Yes. And so that was something that was thrown out there that we haven't seen much movement or insight on, of which I think Justin is about to tell me why. But I think obviously it's clear at a certain point you're in EIR land, but there is housing still on the table for the downtown specific plan that hasn't been delivered, and the question is what's sort of the logjam.
So through the mayor, the only thing I was going to say is that was one of the 6 topics. I think it's the December 16th work plan staff report where we itemized the 6 or so things under community development that would come back to the council early this year with what the work plan was. And so there was at one point in time some talk of maybe doing this that as part of this meeting, and that's not happening. So that's completely something that we could come back with as the follow-up to this meeting. But we would appreciate the opportunity to kind of look at those 6 things in totality and be able to provide you with a recommendation before you start talking with consultants. Because I'm pretty sure the consultants would say they could do something. So that could be the next step, maybe. Then we can kind of free it up after there. We just like to give you some context.
Would it really be out of line if we were to just meet with the consultant and just brainstorm with them so that we're prepared when, and is there any way we can do that under the current contract? Or are there any slush funds that as a council member we have, or any way to just do this, circumventing the process that...
If through the Mayor, if I may, one of the great aspects of working in Menlo Park is that we have so many opportunities, as you see up there. All cities across California are dealing with the impacts of SB 330. I think that typically what we're hoping for through the goal setting session is for the council, and there's lots of inputs, lots of information that you'll need to ultimately make a decision. But we're looking for the council to say, staff, if you go do this, we will of course approach it with an open mind. But this is what we want as a majority council, and we go back and we develop those the work plans, the recommendations, and bring them back to you, and you say yes or no, and we move forward. So I think if we can get, if there is the support for doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on housing, and asking us, what we need to get that done, we can go to the drawing boards. I mean, we have our staff is amazing in its capacity to work through sticky situations. I do want to come back to this issue, though, of community engagement. Any change to the municipal code, which is likely what we may need here to increase housing anywhere in town, is a public hearing, and it has public processes. And we do our best to include everyone in that discussion, which just takes time.
But we're nowhere near there. All we're trying to do is brainstorm about this, and I would love to work with staff on it. I just think staff is at max capacity, and I'm hearing different messages. One is that our staff can do it, and the other is that we're at capacity. Which one is it?
Well, can I suggest this? And when I say there's no slush funds, I don't think there are, but the city does have money if we want to hire a consultant. We don't have a budget for it, but we can make a recommendation on a budget. But I am confident that Mr. Bradley would be glad to meet with the subcommittee independently and brainstorm ideas. And if you want to bring those back to us, then we'd be glad to work with that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, though, Betsy, I think that what we're going to have here is an issue of timeline, and it's all going to get pushed into the housing element. Because even when we were talking about the issue of sort of optimizing the housing that's still left on the table downtown, that was months ago. At this moment, I don't even know if it's worth the additional effort to change the specific plan. Again, given that now we're going to very quickly be into the housing element process, and I think that that's the issue. So again, want to reiterate, very supportive of you guys engaging the consultant and brainstorming, but I think that probably anything that comes out of that, the actual sort of, because again, the consultant cannot circumvent the public engagement process. I still think we're going to get pushed back into this timeline.
So the question is it worth?
Cat had on her light. Did you turn it off? Oh. Sorry.
No, I'll speak after.
The question is, if we're going to be doing it through the housing element anyway, is it worth the excess money to speed that up by what might be 6 months or 7 months?
That was kind of where I was going with this. I agree. I absolutely agree with you. But getting back to the agenda, will that be rolled into, will the housing planning be part of mandated planning and zoning updates? And can we have that as an emphasis? And getting back to where we're giving you feedback on our priorities. Again, we have mandates we have to do. Can we have can we tweak how staff are approaching the mandates, saying yes, we need to do these things? Can we, while we're doing that, have a special focus on seeing what we can do to increase housing in the downtown area?
Well, I think the new state laws with respect to ADUs and the housing element both fall into that category.
So we can focus in these areas while doing the mandated things. It doesn't have to be a separate thing, but I don't want us to lose that focus.
So I think what you're suggesting is just a language modification to the fifth goal here, which is mandated planning and zoning updates and studies, comma, with an emphasis on increasing housing in the downtown area.
Or in target areas, yeah.
We don't have the, Ray and I don't have the paper.
It's in there.
Okay. So where are we?
The last one.
Right here.
And it's on the screen as well.
Okay, right. So I guess I see at least what I'm talking about is well beyond that. What I'm seeing for mandated planning and zoning updates and studies is that what's necessary under SB 330. I'm hoping that a strong ADU ordinance comes out of that, and I'd like to, I thought there was something else, but I can't come up with it right now that falls under the new state laws as well. Anyway, this is sort of as a side piece that would go into the housing needs assessment, that would go into updated land use planning. I don't see it as part of the mandated planning and zoning updates and studies in the near term. When we're talking about the RENA and all, yes, it probably does come under that. Again, I just think there's so much that needs to be done for just getting up and going on SB 330 and with the ADUs that I'm trying to not put everything on staff, and also trying not to get just stuck in the backlog of, we'll do it when we can, realizing that it's staff is trying to get to everything. I strongly commend everything staff is doing. I think that there's heroic efforts going on right now to try and accommodate all these new state laws and figure out how they all fit together. I don't want to pile this on top of it, and yet I think that this is critical to what we need to do as a council. And so I'm trying to sort of bifurcate that, and that eventually it would feed in to it. And then as far as, so one of the ideas that I have is for downtown is just getting rid of the base level, and all housing now goes to bonus level, so that we, these are things that I think we can do without an EIR change that could, maybe putting a minimum number of units required. These are not, I don't think it's rocket science, and it's just, they're possibly things that could be done within the EIR that might make a difference. I have spoken with several developers. Whenever I can, I talk to people who own buildings downtown or who are developers. And essentially it's the zoning that is keeping them from wanting, in addition, the availability where the properties are owned by families who no longer have a mortgage, so they're not worried about mortgage payments, and they've got low Prop 13 taxes, and so they have absolutely no incentive to be doing much with their building. And so I think that that's the biggest piece that's holding us back downtown. But I think that there's pieces that we could do that would still fall within our current EIR requirements that we might be able to get some additional housing downtown.
I just wanted a follow-up question on that. So have we worked on the housing element or SB 330 at the moment? Is there already staff time that's been invested in it? There has been.
With the two different things, so my understanding with SB 330, yes, which is just happening right now. The housing element, no, not yet.
And then RENA, have we invested any staff time in RENA?
We've been tracking the process, but the allocations haven't happened yet. So there's a little bit of staff time tracking what's happening with the RENA process. But until the allocations come out, it's not a material amount of time.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Miller.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand. So what's being so the one proposition that you just spoke about is getting rid of base level by right zoning and making it all bonus level.
For housing.
Right. So get rid of all base level for housing and just make it all bonus level for housing.
Perhaps, yes.
And you think that that is going to make it more likely that someone's going to buy the property and make the investment when they have to go through a bonus level process?
Well, we would get rid of it, so there's no longer a bonus level process. The base level becomes the bonus level.
Okay, so you want to go from base level, you want to get rid of all the bonus level and just say everything that's there right now is by right for housing, no bonus level for amenities.
Correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Carlton?
It's just this sort of thing that I'm trying to figure out.
Not to change the subject,
Yes.
but to change the subject. The second question that you asked on what opportunities exist to use our advisory bodies, I've already spoken to the city manager about this, and I would be happy if there's a subcommittee, whatever. We need to have a better training process to onboard our commissioners beyond just the Brown Act, to be able to say this is the process of how we put together the work plan, this is how we follow the work plan. If you want to change the work plan, this is how this goes. To manage their expectations, to manage, to give better understanding of what's going to be required of them. I'm a big fan of setting expectations and then meeting those. And I think that everyone, including the staff time, in managing the people on our commissions who are often extraordinarily informed, amazing people, I think all the way around would benefit from a structured training program beyond what we have at this point, going through the true processes. And we don't need to go into the details now. I'm just throwing that out there as something that we need to do this year as well.
I agree with Councilmember Carlton. And just one thing to add is better utilizing our commissioners, not specifically housing, but all of our commissioners.
And I can't comment on the projects at this point because I really seriously want to see what our options are and where the trade-off is.
So that's a great segue into global climate change and utilizing our EQC and all of the amazing work that they have done with our sustainability staff, which has also been amazing, and try and get something done there, even though it is not on the recommended priorities. One of the pieces that was recommended by the EQC, and Councilmember Mueller and I are both on the Climate Action Plan subcommittee and have met with the EQC subcommittee, and there was some consensus around dropping the zero waste or postponing the zero waste mandate and doing what we can. There's certainly within the construction, there's new guidelines as far as how to do zero waste, and we don't want to get rid of anything, but really be able to focus attention, have sustainability staff focus attention on the climate action plan, trying to work with the EQC, or not trying to, working with the EQC, and coming up with 3 month, spending 3 months working on a climate action plan 2.0, and in the meantime trying to have some quick council directives possibly. I doubt if we can do it right now, But essentially, as was said, showing that what's good for the community is good first for the city, and moving to electrification, infrastructure electrification, doing whatever we can in the city to showcase that this is good for everyone. And then beyond that, there were two other proposals, which I would love to have on the recommended priorities, to basically work with the EQC and the sustainability group to further climate action for the city. We've been a very strong advocate, shown strong leadership. The last year we've signed 2 resolutions and proclamations and done a strong early reach code. We just did another proclamation in December saying how, again, we were committed to this, and I think that it needs to be one of our 2020 goals. Thank you.
So just as Council Member Carlton said, moving things along, I would like to discuss the community center project last, and that's specifically so that Vice Mayor Combs can leave, because he's recused from that. So if nobody has an objection, so which is why I haven't brought it up yet. So I think we have discussed the mandated planning and zoning enough. And as far as the IT, I think the IT is definitely important, especially when it comes to the needs of the planning department, and expediting the process there. The Middle Avenue rail crossing, that was just on our agenda on Tuesday. So I don't know if anyone has any more input on that. I think we have discussed that. And Councilmember Nash, I see you.
Sorry. I'm just wondering how the Caltrain grade crossing fits in with all of this, because I do believe there's work that's scheduled to go on next year. So presumably it should be one of the priorities.
Justin, do you want to answer that? Nikki was... There she is.
Good afternoon, council members. Nikki Nagaya, Interim Public Works Director. I'll answer specifically for the Ravenswood grade crossing and then more generally for all of our capital projects. What we've done here is a listing of the highest priority projects, but this is not, as you all know, an exhaustive list of everything that is in the CIP. And so we would expect to prioritize the projects that are listed through the council prioritization process to bring those forward, devote resources to those to make sure that they stay on track and advance. That said, the Ravenswood grade crossing, as we move forward, will require staff resources, but it was not one of the highest priorities that we put forward for consideration today, and would be kind of following up on that as resources allow. So specifically, I think our next step is to meet with the council-designated subcommittee, which was Council Members Mueller and Vice Mayor Combs, to follow up and talk through the visual impact requests that came from the residents to go forward. No, so the council, as part of that item, designated an ad hoc subcommittee. Yes.
At this time, I wanted to go back to the 3 questions, which I will not be answering all of them, but I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Mueller's his comment as far as the guiding principles, because I think it's a great segue as we near the end of the part 1 of goal setting. What I would like to see as far as guiding principles is actually looking at the ones that we've already adopted, the citywide equity, healthy community, competitive and innovative business destination, corporate contribution, youth support and education excellence, great transportation options, complete neighborhoods and commercial corridors, accessible open space and recreation, sustainable environmental planning. We definitely don't have to talk about all of them, but I would like to use what we already have, and maybe we can make some adjustments, leave them the same, but it would be a great benchmark to see if we're actually moving towards our guiding principles.
I want to make sure as we near the end of our allotted time, and I know that Councilmember Combs needs to leave before we make final conclusions, but I think what would be very helpful for the staff is to hear from the council the summary of what you think the direction to the staff is today. I could kick it off if that's helpful to you, but I don't. Okay. So I think that what we've heard generally, and I wasn't taking votes, so we can go back and look, but that there are buckets, if you will, to use Justin's term, of climate action plan, housing, and housing, two components of housing. What can we do to create housing, and what can we do to comply with the state mandated housing requirements, and what can we do to process individual residential requests?
Can I add one more thing, and hopefully I'll have the support of the rest of the council, is potentially a zero homelessness initiative. We have less than 100 homeless that live on the streets of Menlo Park, which is not a large number, and some cities have solved homelessness. And so just thinking about that, our numbers are really small compared to other cities. And so I would love to add that, because I think in threes. So I don't know. And that includes homeless population in the city of Menlo Park. So I'm not just talking downtown.
And transportation.
Say that one more time.
And transportation as an initiative. I'm just saying, so now we've got planning, housing, transportation, homelessness, and what did I forget? Climate action plan. Right? Those are the five. So we can come back with some proposed projects / plans / strategies / whatever for the council to consider in those buckets.
What does that look like as far as work resources? And like the resources to put that together?
Oh, to put it together, a few hours.
And so a timeline is that you guys come back with these sort of buckets?
Sooner rather than later. Because we want to make sure that we're working on what's most important to the council.
We're going to have another meeting on this, right? So we are obviously having another meeting on this. So summarizing the discussion on where we were and what the topics were here, because when we look at the next, once we get that list, and I know myself, every time I leave a meeting like this, I go home and I think about it and I dissect it and this, that. I think the next meeting you'll probably get a better summary of where we end up on this, and I think staff will probably have more input on what they heard. We'll probably have some discussions with each of us about that, and we can sort of narrow that down. So for me, what's most important to me is that it's all systemic. I think in terms of systems. So.
Vice Mayor Combs?
I do think it's fair to call out that I have not heard from my colleagues any challenges to the list that staff put together. Obviously, there's one of which I'm recused from, so maybe there will be challenges, but I think I doubt about that. So I think that that is worth noting and putting a pin in, that essentially what we have asked for is extra. But there has been no actual challenges to anything. I mean, because certainly there are some mandated stuff, but there are things that are not obligatory. I mean, there are things where, it would be sort of pausing something, right, or stopping it, but you could make that argument. that other things take priority. And so I just do think it's worth noting that there is a general consensus and support for what staff has brought to us.
I support everything staff has brought to us. I think what I think the discussion will more than likely be are like the second tier and the third tiering of projects. Like when I sit here, I'm like, all right, I support all that, but boy, I want to get downtown on a maintenance schedule, right? Like I think we all have like our second tier projects of like, okay, there's all of that, but then there's like what's second tier, and I understand it's second tier, but do you know what I mean? Like, so.
To Councilmember Mueller's point, the devil's in the details.
I would assume that you'll also bring CIP projects back. Yeah, that's great. And then at what point, I think that there are some daily activities that are currently ongoing that create a tremendous amount of staff work that we need to evaluate if we have the bandwidth to be able to do that. The thing that first comes to mind is the NTMP programs, which on one hand, I think they're incredibly valuable to get streets safer and calmer. On the other hand, it seems that it takes a tremendous amount of resources. And I'm also thinking of the parking program that was brought forward from some residents who wanted to eliminate some parking. And I think that we need to carefully look at these, and sometimes they go a long way before that and then are brought to the Complete Streets Commission, and it takes, I'm concerned about the amount of time, staff time that it takes, and whether we have the ability to accommodate that given all of our priorities. And so I think that I don't know how to look at some of these programs that probably are considered daily, just the daily servicing, but I think that we need to look at carefully at some of them.
I'm sorry to light my light again, but it's funny because I think of what I didn't say is I support all those. It's funny because when I think of CAP, the Climate Action Plan, I don't actually think of it as like a priority. I think of it like as an overarching guiding principle. That's the level that's risen to now. So I don't know how we get it integrated in that, but it's like that. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that's a management. I'd love to hear you guys come back with us as how is that it just sort of integrated into this. So it's not, I don't really want to unless you get a totally different council that doesn't care beans about it, it would be better to have like a systematic programmatic approach that it's not something we're talking about that needs to be a priority this year, but rather that is an overarching principle. And how is that integrated into everything we do?
I agree with Councilmember Mueller, and as I'm looking at the guiding principles, that's healthy community. It's how we live. Councilmember Nash, did you have? No. I wanted to follow up on, and I'll make this as brief as possible. I'm concerned about safety on the streets of Menlo Park. And so it's definitely something that I'll bring back up again. I don't have a specific, but just looking at citywide safety, like a citywide speed limit. It's 40 miles an hour in some areas that lead right into residential. It's 30 miles an hour in some residential areas. It should be 25 citywide. Something simple that can help improve safety. Just thinking about, and I think about how we're connected to Bayfront, 101, and 280. Then there's Middlefield, Willow Road, and El Camino. And just looking at safety around those areas and what more can be done, what's the problem, what's the low-hanging fruit solution. And that was on my list of priorities, is definitely transportation and safety. I think they go hand in hand. So just thinking about what more can be done. I know that there's, through the Safe Routes, there's this crossing guard program that is having a difficult time hiring crossing guards, which is because I think they work about 3 hours a day. And I'm not sure what the wage is, but I'm sure it's less than $20 an hour. But just thinking about things like that, what more can we be doing citywide to promote safety? And on that note, I think, I'm not sure if anybody wanted to talk about the last item that, did you want to follow up?
Just one other thing in terms of clarification while we're all together, in terms of like the follow-up on specifically like the CIP. I'm not sure if we get a little bit more feel for that. Maybe there's some ideas we can throw out, but roughly time frame, because it depends on how much detail you want to go into the CIP, whether it could be a couple hours, and wondering whether, in looking at upcoming council meetings, whether there was a recent budget workshop that was put on that was about the overall budget. It was a Thursday evening in the council chambers. Maybe if a venue like that could at least give the overview and then follow up specifically with the council after that, whether that's a way of moving this along a little bit, just to make sure that everybody's familiar with the 70-plus projects in the CIP.
Yes, I agree with that approach. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else has input on that.
And I know that council, which is great, and then just making sure that that also meets, because it would then come back to the council for sure. But then was there anything else that Councilmember Nash had in mind?
Staffing resources for the CIP.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So as part of that, we could probably fold
But I
into
think
what the staff
generally
resources.
we've seen the CIP a number of times.
Okay.
Just so I'm clear, what I think Justin is recommending is that we'd have a community Thursday night meeting the council would be invited to. We'd go through all of the CIPs. We'd probably provide our recommendations on pausing some, promoting some, moving some forward more quickly. And then just based on the community input we get, we would bring that back as an action item for the city council during the budget process, or earlier than the budget process. We probably need to have that firmed up in the next couple of months.
As long as you have, and you make it very clear, which staff are associated with which one, and let them know that it's a cost. Because always be careful what you ask of people, because then they expect you to act on it. And if they give us a list of 10 things that all fall in one area, and then they'll say, oh, we only did 2, you don't care. They need to be aware, because honestly, unless you look under the hood, you're not aware of the constraints that we're under in terms of people, time, money, and all that. And
I think our entire purpose on doing the CIP review is to identify what the resources are needed for that.
And sometimes even I'm confused. When we talked about the Belhaven Community Library Center, first we were saying, well, this will be all hands on deck. The amount of time required is so short that we're not going to be able to do all these other things. We'll only be able to, and then we sit here now and we talk about all these wonderful things that we want to do. And which one is it? Is the Belhaven Library such a short time period that we really aren't going to be able to do other things? Because, again, it gets back to setting expectations. Fine, if we want this to be done and we have these other things that are mandates.
So I just want to follow up. We were going to talk about that after Vice Mayor Combs left because he's recused from the discussion.
Sorry. Excuse me.
Did you want to talk about that?
No, it was about something. It was about CIP.
Okay, I was going to make a comment about CIP too. So you
No, go for it.
Okay. Well, I think part of the problem, and I remember this is what I ran into with regards to the first time we did this sort of go planning, is sort of things go on the CIP and they become deprioritized, but they never go off. Right, and so I think we need to have a CIP and what is a real CIP, because I remember, Mr. Piqueros, we went back and forth, and one of the issues was specifically the downtown parking garage, and how I was like, it doesn't look like there was support for that, and so that should go away. And you're like, well, it was voted on by a prior council, and so that there actually has to be some agendized item of which it is voted off. And so then it becomes part of this number of things, and it sort of, I think, blurs what are priorities. I mean, and maybe it is the case that there is support for a downtown parking garage, but that's just it, that the council is dynamic and changes, but it doesn't seem as though the CIP has a built-in structure to actually recognize that things are not only just deprioritized, but likely not going to happen. And so I think that becomes what's sort of problematic, and that of a list of 70 things, all those 70 things are not going to happen in our lifetime. And so I think that to have a list of 70 things that we know of which all of them are not going to happen is problematic.
My concern was just if, I think I picked up that this may come back to us in months, and my concern is if we have staff working on projects that may then not be prioritized, that we've then spent a few months of staff time working on those projects.
I think that's a good point. We'll look at that. We'll look at the list with that lens.
Just a time check. We have 3 more minutes.
I just wanted to just touch on something for some clarity because it's the elephant in the room on staffing. So just to sort of explain, I knew there was going to be a lot of discussion about resources and staff members, and so I don't want to get into it too far because we're going to talk about it at a later meeting. But when I was putting forward the provisional FTE, and that was really that wasn't an attempt to make a hiring freeze for the city. What I think what that was an attempt to do is by trying to create a transparent sunsetting process. It actually gives you the ability for the public to look at that process and say, okay, these positions do get sunsetted, and when you do that, you get an understanding in the public that when you need to go ahead and staff up in other areas, you potentially can. You build trust within the public that takes place. One of the arguments that is promulgated out in the public is every time you create a government position, it never goes away. It's not the case, but there is no transparency around that. So I think, that was, the hope is that by doing something like that, and then always within government, you look at whether or not, the other thing that I'd point out is that I personally prefer to be honest with employees when you're staffing up for a short-term duration project. So my questions today about that are just from a transparency standpoint. I think you should be honest with a worker when you have a set duration, a time period that your capacity is going to grow, and you probably aren't going to keep them past that. And so those are just some things that I think about, but I want to make sure that it's not interpreted otherwise. Folks, I think it's important that be that level of trust and explanation about what is taking place in my head. Because right now I understand we are talking about how are we going to be utilizing resources to achieve all of this. And so I wanted to make sure that none of those comments are being taken hostilely. It's not hostile at all. It's just how do we, if we have to staff up for a time period, how do we do that in a way that is explainable, and both to the public and also to the worker in a manner that's fair.
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller, for the clarity. I appreciate that. So have we exhausted the 4 items that we can talk about? And Vice Mayor Combs, was there anything else you wanted to follow up on? Okay, thank you. I was going to add something. Okay. So, wait. For clarity, Vice Mayor Combs is recused from the discussion on the Bellhaven Library and Community Center because he is an employee of the gift giver. So, Councilmember Carlton, so you had the floor with the discussion last, and I wanted to follow up with you. If there was anything else that you wanted to add.
No, my question stands.
Then I have to admit, I don't remember your question. Can we do everything without any additional staffing? Was that the gist of it? Unlikely.
Then let's be real.
Well, I think the staff was trying to be real. That's why we brought you our recommended priorities. And things change. As Nick would say, today's problem is not tomorrow's problem or yesterday's problem. Every day the problem or the challenge is a little bit different. And so how we need to be staffed today is going to be different than how we need to be staffed in 6 months. And so we have to be, I know it may not look like it on the outside, but we have to demonstrate some internal flexibility about, dropping something, picking something else up, moving off one thing, moving to another thing. So I think what will be really helpful for us is to go back, assess, as Councilmember Mueller said, when you reflect on the comments made during the meeting, as it should be, our opinion or our position changes a little bit. We think about what one council member said and then another council member. So we need to have that opportunity to go back and discuss internally and what we think we heard as your priorities, and then come back with that and let you know what we think will take to staff it.
Okay. Well, as I say, it's hard for us to then say, yeah, these are our priorities. Do we have the staff to do this? Because it was my impression that we would be more severely impacted by some of the priorities than others, and therefore, rather than saying, no, we can't do these, come back and say, yes, okay, we can do these if, and explain to us what we need to meet those priorities.
And that's what I hear is the direction from the council today.
Do you have any input? Councilmember Mueller, I think you said you support all. So you didn't have any input on the community center project?
I think, like I said earlier, I think it's a rhetorical question. Like, I don't think there's any choice. Like, it has to be. It has to get done. So yeah. I think it's, so yeah, I have no other comment but that.
I think because we just talked about it on Tuesday, I believe. Which is why there isn't much comment here. And then the subcommittee is meeting, I believe, on Monday, on the 3rd. So by our February 11th council meeting, there will be an update then. I did not do this. Oh, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I just wanted to plug the February 9th meeting at the Senior Center at 3 o'clock in Belhaven. That's a community meeting to just sort of preview for the community the issues going to the council on the 11th.
Is this the meeting that is being hosted at Beechwood? No, it's a different meeting. Okay, so many meetings. I have a question, and this is related to actually a few earlier comments about GEAR, and I know you followed up with it. So what is needed from the council to direct staff that we want to become members, if that's what the council wants?
I think today we would just take a general direction that the council is interested in pursuing membership in GEAR, and then we'll come back with a more finite explanation about what that will take.
Okay. One of the reasons why I would like to push for it to happen sooner than later is because I know it's a process when they come in and bring in their methodology of as far as how we look at things a little differently. And so because of the project with the community center, because of the land use, I'm looking at how to bring equity in to everything that we're doing. And I know it's not going to happen immediately, but that's one of the goals, the reason why I would like the City of Menlo Park to become a member. So, and you have a follow-up, Councilmember Nash?
Oh, I was just going to say that during our council meeting on the Belhaven Community Center and Library, I received a text personalized to me inviting me to respond with Belhaven if I wanted to continue receiving texts, and I was really impressed and think it's a wonderful outreach effort. So thank you.
So I think that
just in, excuse me, but in terms of general direction to pursue membership with GEAR, do I have 3 members of the council that? Okay.
Councilmember Mueller?
Yeah, I'll support it coming before the council for approval. Sure. So let's get it out as an agenda item. We can look at it.
So here's your 3. I believe that brings us to the end of our first goal-setting session. We survived. And I want to thank the council. I know that Councilmember Carlton and Councilmember Nash and Councilmember Mueller was not aware of the change in the format. I wanted this to be more of an open dialogue between the City Council and the staff, just to see where we all are on our priorities, and also allow time for the public to be a part of that as well. And so that's why we didn't have the charts and the graphs that we are used to. And I do apologize for not giving you that format ahead of time, but that was the intention, was just to bring a larger discussion to the council. So thank you. Oh, and thank the public. We thank the public for being here and being part of this process, and we are hoping that our meetings will get shorter. Have a good evening.